Hello, welcome. This is the live stream for November 30th, 2016. And my name is Dana, if you're new here. And if you're not new here, welcome back. So if you are new here, however, let me explain a little bit about how this works. So the chat moves really quickly. And so I have to stop the chat when I'm reading or when I'm thinking of an answer, because I can't think and talk and read and do all these things at the same time. So if I don't see your question, if you can ask some other people in the chat if they can help catch my attention, and that generally works. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Yeah, I guess that's about how this goes. This live stream is a question and answer. It's just kind of me giving my 2 cents. A lot of the people that are in the chat also give their 2 cents about situations, and it's great. The chat tends, I think it goes for quite a while after we stop, after the live stream stops. And the live stream, it happens every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We normally go for, I don't know, probably right around 3 hours-ish, give or take. And there's no such thing as a stupid question or a bad question or any of that. It's just totally open. It's whatever's on your mind and whatever you got going on. So welcome. And I got lots of people hopping on tonight. Let's see here. Oh, we've got Connected and Namal and Connor and Valenta and Angie and Vin. Hey, Vin. Oh, Vin says, Dana, my ex is posting pictures with her new partner all over social media. This is really, really painful. Yes, it is. And I'm so sorry that you're having to go through this. I would strongly encourage you to not go to her social media, not go to his social media, to unfriend anybody that's really connected to them. You might even want to start different social media accounts, at least for like the next 6 months or so, just so you're not there's no fear of you accidentally seeing something you don't want to see or them contacting you. So starting new social media accounts under totally unrelated names, and then that way you can still participate online if you want, but you're not, getting roped into conversations or seeing things that you don't want to see. So, because really there is, and I know that people tend to have this sick satisfaction or sick curiosity, I guess, really sadistic almost curiosity of wanting to know what their ex is up to. It's very normal. Lots of people do this. I would just encourage you to continue to remind yourself that there is no benefit. Nothing will come from you looking at this except pain. So try to remind yourself of that. There's no, Vin, telling yourself, Vin, really? Doing this is only going to bring you pain, because what you're seeing is not real. So remember that, A. And then B, you're seeing the idealized cycle for this new person. So it's intentionally very over the top. And especially if your ex knows that it's all over social media. So she's going to be doing this over the top act of look, I'm just this amazing woman and I'm Princess Charming, and see, it's not me. It's not me. That's the problem. It's him. And thankfully now I found this amazing partner who is so good to me. And look, we're so happy. We're so well adjusted. We're having this amazing life. And so you're seeing the idealized stage for the new guy, but then this is also part of the devalue and the discard stage for you. So this stuff's intended to hurt. It's intended for you to see it. It's intended to grind you down. It's intended to make you look like the problem. And so I would just be okay, I'm done. I'm done. I don't need to be here. I don't need to see this. I've been through enough. This woman is bad news. Yes, you still have feelings. Yes, you still have that level of intensity there. That will pass in time. It makes it a lot easier for a wound to heal if you stop touching it. And again, people struggle with this all the time. If you're in the support group, I'm sure you've seen people post every day somebody posts about this. They're like, I'm feeling really low. I really want to contact them. Or, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? Why on earth did I go look on their Facebook page? Or, so there is that pull to try to get closure, to try to get clarity as far as, are they going to be happy with a new person? Maybe it was me. There's kind of all of these unanswered pieces there. But, the reality is this person is highly problematic. You dodged a bullet. This would never have ended well. And to keep reminding yourself of that all of this pain is really your friend. It's there to remind you it has to hurt this bad in order for you to move on, because love doesn't hurt. Love doesn't do things like this. Healthy people do not do things like this. And, to just keep reminding yourself, like, okay, yeah, I want to look, but I'm not going to. Like, I'm going to go do 25 jumping jacks. I'm going to go call a friend. I'm going to go watch, I don't know, an episode of Game of Thrones. I'm going to go do something else. I'm not going to entertain the idea of looking at something like this. So, but I'm so sorry that you're going through this. I know how hard it is to just shut that door and walk away, but you got to. This is not for you. And there's better things out there for you. There really are. Let's see. Connected says, how do you deal when... chat is moving on its own. How do you deal when seeds of jealousy are planted in you by a narcissist, and then you don't trust them, but they accuse you of having unwarranted trust issues and are the unhealthy, unfair one? You completely distance yourself from that person, is what you do. That's crazy making behavior. So if somebody is planting seeds of jealousy in you, that any sane, reasonable, normal person, that would make them jealous or at a minimum insecure, that's a problem. Like healthy, normal, well-adjusted people don't do that. So if they're saying, oh, well, this woman, she just found me so attractive, or all these women just give me their phone numbers, or I just message bikini models on Instagram. Like, there's no problem with that. I mean, come on, I have female friends or male friends or what have you. If they're acting in a squirrely way, and and anybody would be like, yeah, that's weird. Like if you were to take those messages, or if you were to take the situation and you were to tell somebody whose opinion you trust, right? So think about like the healthiest, most well-adjusted person you can think of. If you were, or even, yeah, okay, we'll go with that. So think about like the healthiest, well-adjusted person you could think of. If you were to say, hey, what do you think of this situation? If they were to be like, what? That's weird. Yeah, that's weird. No, people don't do that. Like, that's not normal. Then it's a problem. That's kind of a good way that you can gauge that. If they would have a problem with you doing what they're doing, that's a problem. So yeah, if they're doing squirrely things, then demanding trust and then spinning it around on you saying, no, you just have trust issues. No, you don't. They have lying issues. And that's a sign that you got to cut bait and drive on. So dating a crazy maker, being friends with a crazy maker, having a crazy maker in your life to any capacity, the only way to get rid of a crazy maker is to go no contact and cut bait. Because if you find yourself, playing detective and researching, and you're on Google and you're asking friends, and you're trying to get into their email account and see what they're doing on social media, and you're finding yourself with that level of like insecurity and distrust and paranoia, you're with the wrong person. When you're with the right person, or at least an honest person, you don't feel that way. So think about how you feel when you're around people that you do trust. You don't feel distrustful. You don't feel suspicious. Any issues that come up can be openly and freely discussed, and then they're resolved, generally in a very short amount of time. There's no trying to drag the full truth out of somebody. There is no playing detective. There's none of that, because they're not trying to hide anything. So I would take that as a clear sign to break up and drive on. But that's what they do. So Melanie says, that's my exact situation. I have been cheated on 5 times and caught him every time, and yet he accuses me. Yes, so that accusing you is called projection. This is something that narcissists, especially people with bad behavior in general, do. So, and it's a weird, like, psychological phenomenon. So if a person's not comfortable with and everybody does it to some extent. If we're not comfortable with our own behavior, we project it onto another person. It's like one of the weirdest things that people do. So if you have somebody and it's hard for us to see it, like when we are actually like projecting our uncomfortable thoughts onto other people, it's really hard for us to see it, because that's why, because it's a psychological defense mechanism, because we're not comfortable with what we're thinking. So our brain gets rid of that and puts it on somebody else. So if somebody starts accusing you of doing things that you're not doing, odds are it's because they are doing it. Cheating is a very common one. It's very common for people that are cheating to start, even if they've been caught cheating, because they justify their behavior in their mind. And again, the reason people justify things is because all human beings, we all have this need for our thoughts and our actions to line up. Okay, this is the core of cognitive dissonance, really. So when our thoughts don't line up with our actions, we experience what's called cognitive dissonance. This concept, it sounds complicated, but it's not. Once you can understand this, it's seriously life-changing, because then you have a better idea of how your brain works and how other people's brain works. So cognitive dissonance. So when we have a thought that doesn't match our action, one of 2 things needs to happen. We either need to change our thought, or we need to change the action. If a person's going to have that action, they're going to continue that action. If they're going to, let's say, for example, they're going to stay in the relationship, okay, then, and if they have the thought, well, I told him I wasn't going to stay if he continued to cheat, but then they find out that this person's cheating again. Okay, so now it's like, uh-oh, I have 2 conflicting thoughts about staying in the relationship. If you want to stay in the relationship, you're holding on to that action, then you're going to have to pick the thought that lines up with you staying in the relationship. So generally, which is you're going to rationalize and justify your action. So in this is how people, this is all part of like how this manipulation gets so intertwined with people, and how it happens. So if you, and oftentimes how we justify things is we buy into their excuses. So if he's saying, oh, well, it didn't really happen, or it was only once, or she meant nothing to me, or, well, really, I cheated because you were never home, or, right? If we want to stay, then we're going to have to accept some sort of justification to allow us to rationalize why we're staying. So they do the same thing with their behavior. This is how all people do this, right? So thoughts and actions have to always line up with people, or we have that cognitive dissonance, which is a fancy way of saying mental distress. We feel distress when our thoughts and actions don't line up. So if they are cheating, that's the action, okay? They're going to have to pick a thought that is in alignment with them cheating. And generally, most people need to think of themselves as a decent person. So in order for them to make themselves not the problem, they're going to have to rationalize their problematic behavior. And they do this by generally telling themselves, by not having accountability. So it's very rarely, it's never sincerely their fault. It's always somebody else's fault. It's always, she threw herself at me, you were never home, I was drunk. There's always an excuse, and that's why. Because they need to have a thought that matches their action. So, yeah, I hope that helps. It's also, too, when a person is able, especially problematic, if they're able to justify and rationalize problematic behavior like that, then they've already done the mental gymnastics to make that okay with them. This is another, I feel like, a very important part of the puzzle for people to understand, that if a person's already rationalized bad behavior once, it's a slippery slope. It's that pathway in their brain is already wired. So it's really easy for them to continue doing whatever it is they're doing and to continue rationalizing and justifying it. So, and this is the core like common statement of abusive people in general, is it's the whole like, look at what you made me do. And that's why. This is also one of the reasons that therapy, especially couples therapy, is really, it's not only tends to be not effective, it tends to be more damaging. This is what studies have concluded. This isn't just my take on it, although it is also my take on it. It's a big, huge mistake to get into, really to have sincere communication with a highly manipulative person who is not looking for a sincere resolution to the situation. Because what you're doing is, if now you're in couples therapy and you're being sincerely honest about that, you're basically playing poker with somebody. You're playing a game, is what it is. When you're being manipulated and lied to and deceived, you are playing a game, but you don't realize it, and you're losing. So it's like playing poker with all of your cards out. So you're being open and honest and sincere and solutions oriented, and they are smiling and nodding and giving the answers that they feel the therapist wants to hear or that you want to hear. And the whole time they're extracting information from what you want, what you need, what your fears are, all of this, to eventually use this against you at a later time. That's what manipulative people do. So, to me, if a person's shown any level of manipulation or deceit, if they're showing that they don't have that team orientation, if they're showing that they are totally fine with destroying the relationship when you're not looking, that's a relationship you need to get out of. Because that's not a relationship, that's a manipulationship, and there's a big, big difference. So holding on to hope that another person who has shown that they have no empathy, no remorse, no regard, no value to commitment, to honesty, to fidelity, to any of that. It's the whole thing. Like, when a person shows you who they are, believe them. And who a person really is who they are when they think no one's looking, especially their partner. So if you're finding stuff out, okay, yeah, they've been cheating, they've been funneling funds out of our account to live a double life or to do all these things that they know I'm not okay with, and they're just doing whatever they want to do at the damage and expense of our relationship, then you're not in a relationship. So, ouch, I know, but it's the sooner, and it's so hard for us to realize that this could really be the case, because we don't think this way. We would never act like this. And so what we fall into is kind of, I don't even know if this is a real term, but reverse projection, where we're projecting all of our positive and good traits onto them, thinking, well, if we can just get through to them, if we can just somehow get them to understand that lying and cheating and, siphoning funds and, manipulating and deceiving and hitting and kicking and spitting and cussing and yelling and screaming is not appropriate behavior, then we can have this great relationship with them. And of course, a manipulative person is very content to allow other people to, it's like the dangling the carrot. Like, yeah, you think what you want to think. Like, I'm going to have you hold on to hope that I could possibly change someday down the road, given enough time or love or understanding or rehab or therapy. And, it takes partners of these kinds of people years, if not decades, to actually realize, you know what, we keep going around the same mountain time and time again. And perhaps what they're seeing is, you know what, I thought we dealt with this issue. I thought the cheating was gone, but really what had happened is they just got better at hiding it. So, it's something to get clear on for you. What are your deal breakers? And if you are holding on to hope that this other person could actually grow a conscience and behave like a person that actually wants to be in a committed relationship, to get really crystal clear with yourself, how much time and energy and money are you willing to throw at this? And then reverse engineer it. That'll give you your answer. Because it's not, I'll tell you, even if they get into individual therapy, you're not talking like 3 to 6 sessions. I mean, this is like really deep, problematic, highly problematic behavior. So you're looking at a long time, I would say, in therapy on a regular basis with a good therapist. So getting clear with yourself, like, what am I willing to do? What am I willing to do? So if I do walk away, I can do so with knowing that either I hit my deal breaker behavior or I gave my all or some combination of both. So if you're like, okay, I'm willing to try, this is the behavior that I need to see change. This is how I'm going to measure that it's actually changed, because of course, taking their word for it is a terrible idea, right? So realizing that right now, when trust is broken, there is no relationship. Doesn't matter if you're married or not. There is no relationship if trust is not present. So you're starting over at ground zero with basically a stranger. And actually worse than that, it's a person who has been actively working against you and who is totally okay with coming home at night, kissing you, telling you that they cared or that they loved you the whole time, having a double life. That's wild. And the mental gymnastics that they had to do in order to be okay with that is really problematic. That's really, really, really problematic. So getting clear, okay, if we're going to focus on, it's not even working on the relationship because there is no relationship. It's focusing on rebuilding a relationship. It's going to require trust. Trust is something that's earned. It's not blindly given. You're starting at a deficit, right? It's not just like with a total stranger, right? Like if you and I were to meet, our level of trust would be, like at a neutral level. So like on a scale of 0 to 10, maybe your initial impression of me or whoever might be, like a 3 or a 4. Like I'll trust you to a certain extent, but I'm not going to leave my wallet on the table or my cell phone or tell you my passwords, right? Like, because that kind of trust is earned. So I'm going to slowly open up to you, and then based on your reaction to what I'm telling you is how this relationship is going to either develop or regress based on like what's appropriate. So if you're telling that person, personal things, and then they start having squirrely behavior, or they start acting in a way that you're like, this person's not safe, then it's appropriate to kind of back up a few steps. If they show that, yeah, I'm safe, that they can keep a secret, that they, are in your corner, then it's appropriate to kind of give them a little bit more rope, right? And to slowly open up as time allows. Like, key phrase there, as time, I should say, as time goes on, because trust is something that's earned over time. It's not something that can be rushed. So if you are in this rebuilding phase, it does help to think about, okay, what do I need to have? What needs to be done in order for me to be able to rebuild trust? So that if this were to happen to me in my book, it would mean I would need them to be able to have any conversation that I wanted to have about what happened. And it would generally mean I want to talk to whoever they cheated on me with. Because I guarantee you, when you're dealing with a liar, you're never getting the full truth. Okay, am I back? I just looked up and the button was gray. So I'll have to remind myself to look at that. I don't know why this just cut out. So, okay. So as I was saying, so for me, if I found out a partner was cheating, I would want to talk to the person they cheated on me with, because you're going to get a much fuller picture talking to that person. And I would insist and expect that they would be willing to live a life of total and complete transparency. Meaning I have passwords to their phone, I have passwords to their email, I see their email account, and I would want everything right then. Not like, I want to have this stuff and then you're going to give it to me in like an hour or in a day after they've done damage control and deleted a lot of things. No. Like, if you're truly sorry, this is what needs to happen, and it needs to happen now. Like, I want her phone number. I want, and then I would do some digging. I would go check out, I would get their phone and I would look at apps and see, were they, download Tinder, I don't know if Plenty of Fish has an app, and see, and really get to the bottom of it. If their story matches what you find, that's a good step in rebuilding trust. If it does not, then they're not being fully open and honest and sincere, and they're still in damage control mode, trying to get what they want. And to me, that, again, like, that's a deal breaker. That's the hard thing when you're dealing with a liar, is they lie. And like, you can never trust them. It's sort of like when, a vase breaks, a glass vase breaks. Yes, you can glue it back together and it's still a vase, but it's not the same. And it would probably not be a good idea to put a whole bunch in it, because it can't withstand any pressure. That's kind of how a relationship is after trust has been broken to that extent. Like, you might still be dating or married on paper, but the foundation is really profoundly cracked. And that's what's so hard when you have a person that violates trust in such a big way, because the person who has been cheated on, they're the one that has to do all of the work and with rebuilding trust and the mental gymnastics with all of it and thinking. I mean, it's a lot. It's not just about them sleeping with somebody else. It's how it impacts every single aspect of your relationship. And then, of course, it begs the question of, well, what else have they been up to that you don't know about? And how long, it goes on and on. This is why, for me, broken trust at that level is just the deal breaker, because I know myself well enough to be like, it would make me nuts trying to sort through what's a lie and what's the truth. And I just don't have the time, the energy, or the desire to do that. Like, we're either on the same team or we're not. Like, it's pretty cut and dry. So let me scroll down here. Let's see, Cam is here. Hi, Cam. Hey, Postmodern's here. Angie's here. Amber. Let's see. Oh, North Went South was asking, why would you want their passwords? If you feel or have trust, you won't need it. I agree completely. I was talking about in the context of, if there was broken trust in a relationship, to me that would be part of them being willing to rebuild it. So I'm obviously not going to take their word for it, like that they've now somehow turned the corner and that everything's fine. And I'm not going to believe, if a person breaks trust with me, I'm going to assume that everything that they've ever said to me is a lie. And we are starting over at ground zero. So it's not just at that level of like, oh, you're a stranger, I'm a stranger. They're at a deficit. They're at like a -10, because not only has that trust been broken, but they've been manipulating and lying and deceiving me, which is actively working against us in a relationship, versus a normal person that I don't know, a total stranger off the street, hasn't done me wrong. Like, I just don't know them well enough. That trust hasn't been earned. But if a person's actively working against me, no, like, we're done. So I wouldn't stay in a relationship with a person that's broken that level of trust, because like I said, I don't have that time or the energy to try to do all that work, to try to piece things together. Again, my perception is either we're on the same team or we're not. It's pretty cut and dry. And I'm not going to spend time and energy and money and therapy trying to get you to convince you to be on my team. So that's, let's see. Tony says, preach it. Your truth is spot on. Well, thank you. Tea. Yes, my tea. It's actually my last bag of tea. I need to make sure to go get some at the store when I go in the next day or so. Aura says, if the person isn't a narcissist and cheats, isn't that a sign of something wrong from both sides, though? Not that it shouldn't be over, but just something to think about. No, it's not. Because everybody's responsible for their own behavior, right? So it's, at a minimum, it's a sign that this person has really poor communication skills, destructive decision-making, and that this is how they handle issues in the relationship. Like, any of those things is a deal breaker. Like, if you're going to get upset with me and then cheat on me, or if you're going to get upset with me and then drain my bank account, or get upset with me and key my car, or cause destruction and damage in my life in any way, shape, or form, like, we're done. Because I'm not signing up for that. Like, that's drama and dysfunction to a pretty major degree. So no. And let me back up too with the word narcissist, right? Because I get it. A lot of people really focus on like narcissist, like narcissistic personality disorder, like extreme narcissist. A person acting narcissistically is bad enough, if it's not within that range of like healthy narcissism, right? If it's problematic narcissism, where it's a me first, right? Like it's a me first at the expense of you or at the expense of the relationship, that's a problem. A person doesn't need to have, I still have these little bugs everywhere. A person doesn't need to have a full-blown personality disorder in order for things to be a deal breaker or in order for things to be problematic. Having any degree of problematic behavior that's not okay with you, for you to figure out what is deal breaker stuff with me. This is like what all of this is about. Like all of my videos, everything that I say and think and feel and all of it. And that's probably the biggest part and the hardest part with healing is it all boils down to you, to you. So it's about knowing yourself well enough to be like, okay, what is deal breaker behavior for me? And what is deal maker behavior for me? And what is workable behavior? And why? And really getting crystal clear on that. And think, because you don't have to justify any of this to anybody else. Like this is your life and it's all about you. So getting really clear on that, because there's no shortage of people out there that are not going to like the decisions that you make, that are going to tell you, oh my goodness, your partner, okay, sure, they drained your bank account and they ran off with their, they had this affair, but you know what? They were an alcoholic, but now they're sober, so you should give them another chance. Or you know what? Now they found God, so you should give them another chance. People, there's no shortage of well-intended bad advice out there. So in order for you to navigate the waters of life, it really helps for you to have a solid understanding of like your own compass and when things are right for you and when things are not right for you and what kind of adjustment needs to be made in order for you to stay on course. So I hope that helps. But actually, let me go back to that real quick. The what you were talking about, problematic behavior in a relationship, couldn't it be a sign that something is wrong from both sides? And okay, I kind of touched on that a little bit like earlier in that. But you know how I was saying that it's individual, we all are responsible for our own reactions to things. So if a person has a pattern, especially if they have a pattern of like dangerous or destructive behavior, that's totally on them. And I think it's really difficult to sort out sometimes what is an individual problem and what is a relationship problem. And I think a lot of people, and I've been manipulated with that too. So this idea of, well, if you were just, thinner, or you wore more makeup, or if you dressed sexier, or if you did X, Y, and Z, then I wouldn't have done A, B, and C. And a lot of people can fall into that, thinking, oh, well, there's two sides to every story. And, there's always kind of what's your side in this in a relationship. But if a person's got, like character flaws, right? Like major personality things, and that's how they handle problems in their relationship, then it's not a relationship issue, it's an individual issue. And the relationship will continue to have problems until that individual gets those resolved. So again, back to my example of if I had an issue, if you and I were friends, right? Or if we were dating or what have you, if I had an issue with you and my solution to show my frustration was to smash the windows in your car, that's not a friendship issue or a relationship issue. That's a me issue. I need to learn how to handle my emotions in an appropriate way. So abusive, destructive behavior is never justified because it's an individual issue. It's about power and control. within that person. Nobody can make another person behave in a certain way. People behave in ways in which they're okay in behaving in. Now, yes, highly manipulative, highly problematic people can bait. They do a really great job at like baiting and provoking people in that crazy making, to where they keep going to where a person becomes so frustrated or exhausted that they explode. Once you realize, oh, there's people out in the world that actually do this. Like, they're doing this intentionally. It's not a relationship issue. It's not a communication breakdown, which is, I think, what a lot of us tend to think for a long time. If I can just choose the right words, if I can just figure out a way to get through to this person, if I can just not mention certain topics of conversation, if I can just walk on eggshells, really is what it is, then my behavior can then control their behavior. That's what walking on eggshells is. So it's the thought of, if they're abusive, then I just won't bring up anything about the kids or about bills or about a vacation or about anything that could potentially set them off, because their behavior is somehow a reaction to my behavior, but it's not. Their behavior is a reflection of what's going on inside them internally. It's about power and control. And this is why, like, until they get that resolved, they're going to just keep hurting people. And in turn, really, they're hurting themselves. But they don't realize it. Okay. Mystic Gaming says, Dana, I am a college student. I recently asked my professor about people that suffer from narcissistic personality disorder, and he says that we, codependent people, are on the same spectrum as them. So my question is, do we truly... cliffhanger. Where's the rest of the question? I can work with that. I don't know what happened to the rest of the question. So, yes, in theory, we are. And that's a big question and a big controversial answer that I'm sure I'm going to get lots of lots of interesting mail about. So let me draw, and I should just print this out. Okay. Hold on, give me a second here. Oh, I should do this on a different sheet of paper. Okay, hold on. Stand by. I got it. I'm getting it figured out here. How to illustrate this, because this is such a great point. And as you will see, I am no artist. So I apologize here. Hold on. I'm almost done. All right. So let me see if I can do this topic with the do it the justice that it deserves, because it's such a big topic. So I'm going to do my best here. Here is how I understand it. But actually, let me back up a little bit, because it can feel, understandably so, very insulting if you are a codependent or think that you have some issues with codependency, to be like, yeah, no, I'm not even close to being on the same spectrum. How could this possibly be? They're abusive and I'm not. Like, I'm the exact opposite. I'm very compassionate. I'm very caring. I'm very forgiving, very understanding. How could this even be possible? So if you think of, actually, a scale. Maybe the wording is backwards on this, I'm not sure. If you think of it like a scale like this, so in the middle, you have, it's neutral, okay? So this would be like the spectrum of like self-orientation, okay? So you've got a person that's, over here is narcissism. So this is a scale of narcissism, and there's degrees of it, okay? So when you start getting onto the more extreme side, it starts getting more and more and more problematic. So if this in the middle here is a person, the degree of self-orientation for narcissism is it's very much, it's a me first attitude. It's all about power and control over for narcissists, it's over themselves, and it's over other people, and it's over other situations. Codependency, so if you look at this, again, this is like the spectrum of self-orientation, right? In the middle, this would be like a fully, well, maybe like right about here, like a fully actualized person. Like a healthy self-orientation. And I'll get into that here in a second. So then on the other side, you have codependency. And codependency is more of an others orientation. So whereas narcissism is a me first orientation, codependency is more of a you first orientation. It's, to any degree, this is problematic, okay? So it's considered, let me get a different color here. So kind of in this range, where there's this orange box, on more of the side of narcissism, this is what's considered healthy narcissism. And it's the mindset of my self-orientation, a person's orientation of, it's like, yeah, you know, why not me? Like, why not me? Why not now? It's what gets a person, it's what drives a person. It's what gets us out of the bed in the morning. It's what makes us think, yeah, I can have goals and dreams and hopes, and I can achieve them. And I can go after what I want in this life, like to a healthy degree, right? So yeah, I could write a book. I could, go to college. I could, do all of these things. I can, because you'd be putting yourself, you would be making yourself a priority. I think that maybe is a better way to say it. It's that orientation where you're making yourself a priority. Where narcissism becomes problematic is, and again, this is 2 degrees, is when you start getting to this orientation where you're not making yourself a priority, you're putting yourself first at the expense of others. So then, here again at this extreme part, this is where you have people that are, serial killers, for example, that are like, yeah, you know what? Like, I wanted to kill this person. I want what I want when I want it, however much I want it, to any degree that I want it. So those kinds of people that it's so much about them at the expense of everybody else, they really, it's all about them. There's no empathy, there's no remorse, there's no taking other people into consideration. It's just what they want to do. And they feel justified in doing whatever they want to do. That's what's so problematic, is in their mind, they think they're better than other people. They feel entitled, and they feel entitled to put themselves first at the expense of others. They feel entitled and justified in cheating and lying and siphoning funds, of having double lives, of abusing people, of hitting people, of, sexually assaulting people, of murdering people. Like, it's, degrees, but it's like really problematic. Same with codependency, though. So if codependency, and I think you could make the argument, I'm going to make the argument that there is a range of healthy codependency, okay, but to a degree, and there's a certain time and place, for us, and people slide kind of, ideally, like a healthy, normal, well-adjusted person's going to slide around kind of this normal scale, right? So, like, let's say, for example, you have a loved one who is sick. You're probably going to be putting them first, right? Like, you're going to be bringing them meals or taking care of them, or doing things that are not convenient for you because you care about them, and you realize there's a time and place to put other people ahead of myself. Like, this is what people do. This is, what a lot of parents do, right? And people that care about others, this is what they do. When codependency becomes an issue is when we're living in this place where our others orientation is all about putting other people first. So all of our wants and needs and hopes and dreams and desires are always on the back burner. It's always everybody else first. And to a problematic degree, codependency at this level, where a person has made another person, generally a narcissist, their whole world, this degree of codependency, so like this degree of narcissism can lead to like a narcissistic person, potentially killing somebody. This degree of codependency over here can lead to a person potentially killing themselves, or getting like slowly dying over time by being just drained through the emotional highs and lows of being in a relationship with a narcissistic person. So codependency is to me, it's very problematic, and it's something that people really need to be made aware of, and something that we need to examine within ourselves and examine healthy boundaries, because people that are codependent to a problematic degree, they're so used to putting other people first that they've lost their ability to be in tune with their own instincts. They've lost their ability to gauge what is a safe person, what is a safe situation, what is a dangerous situation. They tend to stay in very dangerous situations for a very long time. They have very poor boundaries or non-existent boundaries. Everything is all about other people. And a person's life is not going to work well down in this level. I would say at this level, again, it's healthier, but it's still problematic. I would make the argument that at about this level, like a functional codependent, they might find a good outlet for this in being a teacher or a nurse or a therapist or a social worker or a caregiver, or that kind of thing. So they're getting those needs met, because oftentimes I think with a lot of us that are on this side, we're like, boy, I think for a lot of people, myself included, it feels really good. It just feels really, really good to be able to give and give and give and give. But it's something that we have to watch out for, that we're not giving so much of ourselves that it's killing us. Okay, so that's one way of there's two other ways I just want to bring to your attention, okay? So this is kind of the spectrum of narcissism and codependency. This is another way to look at this. And interestingly enough, I've been doing this for close to 2 years now, and I don't think I've ever had anybody ask me about the law of attraction in 2 years. And I had 3 people this week ask me about it. It's interesting. So here in Ross Rosenberg, in his book, The Human Magnet Syndrome, does a really great job, I think, of explaining this. So basically, if you take this spectrum, okay, and you make it into like a U shape. So this would be, in his book, he's talking about the magnet. So this is really what it is. It's kind of opposites attract. So it's on the same spectrum. So here you have, again, at the bottom, there's kind of this level of like this healthy, balanced person, right? This orange rectangle thing here. People tend... So his whole theory is that basically opposites attract. That we... Oftentimes, if there's dysfunction present, that people tend to be attracted at a subconscious level. This is key in all of this, because if you're thinking like, no, I never signed up for this, are you nuts? No, I'm not nuts. At least I don't think I am, but I don't think I am. We subconsciously are attracted to people based on basically the same degree of dysfunction, if you're looking at it as a dysfunctional thing. But I think at the same time, we're also attracted to people that are at the same level of function as us. I think there's also a third way that a person can understand this, and would be dating a person, again, like at the same level of dysfunction, right? So this dysfunction can be between narcissists and codependents. Again, it's that self-orientation, right? So if you've got a person who's very self-oriented, me first, and you've got another person over here who's very much, yeah, you first. If a person's at a codependent level of, let's say, like on that spectrum of let's say a 4, okay? They're going to be dating people that are close to a 4, generally on the opposite side of the spectrum. So people that are around like the narcissistic level of around a 4. Those kinds of relationships, again, like depending on kind of, give or take a few points, like a little bit of wiggle room there, can work to some degree. But what you're not going to have is you're not going to have a person who is incredibly, like dangerous, deadly, dysfunctional with a spouse that's perfectly healthy, well-adjusted. That does not happen. So if you've got, it's the whole kind of water seeks its own level. So, and I know this, like, just hear me out. And then I'll go through it and I'll kind of give my take on it, because this would have sent me into orbit. Had I heard it a couple years ago, I would have been really upset by this. So again, like, okay, it's the whole like water seeks its own level. At a conscious level, for us, you could even make the argument for narcissists too, but for codependent people, everybody, right, is their own baseline for normal. So in our mind, we're like, no, I did nothing wrong. Like, I'm not dysfunctional. I believed everything that they said. I gave them a second chance and a 22nd chance. And I tried to work on making, my only mistakes were in loving them too much. And to that, I would say, exactly. That's exactly where our problems are. But for us who've always been like that, it's really hard for us to understand, like, wait a minute, how could this took me years to fully realize. It wasn't until I did all these YouTube videos and people began pointing it out to me, because of course everything is obvious, right? To like other people. Like, I have a ton of clarity for your life and you probably have a ton of clarity for my life, but it's so hard to see our own issues, right? So people were pointing this out to me, and then that was when the pieces began to snap together for me. And my guess would be for you too, if you're in a support group or what have you, because it's always easier to see this stuff in other people. But it never dawned on me that that caring and being compassionate and understanding could be a problem. Like, that just never crossed my mind. I always thought of codependent people as continuing to go back to problematic relationships time and time and time and time again. I did that before with friendships and with a guy I dated in high school, but I hadn't done that in like 20 years. So I didn't get it. But when I began to think of codependency in terms of where am I in this? Where are you in this? Where are your boundaries? What is your orientation? Is it a me first orientation, or is it an others first orientation? And if it's an others first orientation, is it to the point where you have a hard time saying no? Is it where you feel like you have to be people pleasing? Do you tend to kind of, go along for the sake of getting along? How are you with confrontation? How are you, like, where are your personal preferences? What are your wants and needs? These kinds of things. So it's worth examining if you have a pattern of these one-sided relationships where you give and you give and you give, and you've got somebody else who continues to take and take and take. That's a problem. And again, this, like, I didn't see this within myself for a long time. And a lot of people really, they don't like the word or even the concept of codependency because they feel like it's victim blaming. And I understand that, but I think it's worth examining. You don't have to assign any labels you don't want to assign to yourself. But I think it's everybody, we know for sure, everybody has a self-orientation. Every single person on the planet. So it's part of knowing yourself is to know, where are you on that spectrum? So that's the second way of looking at it, right? And then, I was kind of showing too, like, so dating the same level of dysfunction. So, okay, a person who continues to give and give and give, right, is going to be a quote unquote good match to a person who continues to take and take and take. Also, the way that this dysfunction can match up is if you have a narcissist and a narcissist. So or here's an example, like with, let's say, addicts or alcoholics, right? When you have two alcoholics that are in a relationship or in a friendship, they generally have about the same degree of alcoholism, because we all are our own baseline for normal. So anything that if I've got a drinking problem, right, and I drink 10 beers on a Saturday, and I'm like, you know what, that's totally normal. People do that. Like, that's normal. It's not. But telling myself, yeah, okay, this is just what I do. I do this every single Saturday, and I don't have a problem. I'm probably going to hang out with other people that drink as much as I do or a little bit more, because that's how we're able to then justify our behavior and be like, no, I don't have a problem like that. Like Bill's got a problem. Like, Bill drinks, 12 beers on a Saturday, but I only drink 10. So I don't have a problem in relation to him. That's kind of the added challenge with dysfunctional behavior, if we're hanging out with people that are worse than we are. Same thing if you've got a problem spending money, right? And you're like, I just love to go shopping. And you're hanging out with friends that love to go shopping, right? And you're like, well, I don't really have a problem. I only spent $100, whereas Jane spent $1,000. Jane's got a problem. It's how we tend to justify things. Or if we've got a friend that drinks less than us, let's say if my normal is I drink 10 beers on a Saturday, which that would knock me out for like 4 days, like if I did that. But if I drink 10 beers on a Saturday, and if I had a friend that drank, but nowhere near that level, that's going to make me uncomfortable being around that person, because then I'm going to be more aware of I'm drinking a lot. So I'm going to do one of two things. Either I'm going to drink less, or I'm going to continue pushing them into drinking more so I don't feel bad about my own behavior. That's the problem of when you get two people that have the same type of dysfunction together. That's what makes that such a challenge, because then it just snowballs, right? So then the other person they either start drinking more, or they quit hanging out and they find people that can drink the same amount. It's, if you can kind of make that analogy into relationships. Here is the third orientation. When, in my opinion, when it comes to narcissism and codependency, or maybe like a third way of thinking about it, is as a wheel. So again, you're taking this U shape here, and then you're wrapping it into a complete circle. So at the top, you've got you've got an extremely codependent person, like a 10 on codependency and a 10 on narcissism. At this level, when a person is that codependent that they are making other people their total world, their behavior does become very narcissistic, because they're so focused on basically clinging to this relationship. It's at the expense of everything else. It's oftentimes at the expense of their children. It's at the expense of their job. Because they are so focused on keeping this relationship that they will do whatever they need to do in order to make that happen. So it's a very it's toxic codependency at that level. It causes, again, like I said, it will lead to death if it's left untreated. This is where people are like, I can't be with this. This is the person I want to be with. I can't be with them. They've been discarded by this narcissist, and then they commit suicide. Or this person's incredibly abusive. They might even be sexually abusing their children, but because they're so codependent, they're so addicted to this other person in this relationship and making this work out, that they are glossing over what's going on, the damage that's being done in their home by this other person, because they're so focused on making this relationship work. So it's to that extreme, both of which it's incredibly problematic. This is why it's it's so problematic when you get people at both of those levels that are together, because a codependent person at that level, they don't have deal breaker behavior. They're going to stay in it. They're in it for the long haul. They will be dragged through hell until until they die. Until they get involved with drugs or alcohol, or they commit suicide, or they're just pushed over the edge by their partner. It does not end well, because they've lost that ability to put themselves first and to do what's healthy and normal. So let me get some tea here. So that dynamic between a codependent person and a narcissist, a lot of codependent people, myself included for a very long time, were like, no, I did not know what was going on. I was being manipulated. Had I known, I would not have been in that relationship. I just didn't know that there were people on the planet that acted this way. And yes, I will agree that a lot of times but it's still codependence. It's still that others orientation. That we'll just call it the others orientation, because I think that's less debatable. That others orientation, because again, we're all born into this life, that our self-orientation depends on a lot of different factors. It depends on our relationship with our parents. It depends on what's going on in our home life. It depends on a wide variety of sphere of influences, of our peer group, of our religion, of our culture, of our neighborhood, of all of these different things. So it starts at a very young age, that self-orientation, and some of it's gender, right? So there's just a lot of factors at play as to what gives a person the self-orientation that they have. And because this stuff's not taught either, right? So like I think a lot of us, now that we had to learn the hard way, and we're like, oh, like I just really was going through life thinking that other people were reasonable, kind, compassionate people. I did not know that this was such a problem. And I realized that there were problematic people in the world. I just thought I'd be able to see them coming. And I probably thought a lot of them were already in jail. Like I just didn't realize it. I think that's very common for the vast majority of people out there that are kind and caring and compassionate, because it's called having a just world perspective. It's thinking that the world is fair and just, and that we will be treated in the way that we treat others. And that is not always the case, right? So we will be treated according to our self-orientation. So if we don't have a healthy self-orientation where we give and give and give, we're going to continue to be taken advantage of. We're going to continue to be steamrolled over. We're going to continue, it's going to be a big gamble as to who is in our life. Because if our floodgates are wide open and we don't have a solid sense of self, and if we don't have a solid sense of what problematic behavior is and what deal breaker behavior is, then we're going to find ourselves surrounded by a lot of different types of people, because we're just letting everybody in. Everybody, come on in, come on in. And it takes a lot for it to register of, hey, this is a problem. And then even when we do see that there's a problem, we tend to think this can be fixed, because we would fix it if it was within us, right? Like, because we don't have squirrely behavior. We tend to not like lie and cheat and steal and do drama and craziness. But we oftentimes find ourselves tangled up with people that do, and that's why. So I hope that kind of makes sense. I'll be really curious to hear what you guys have to say about this, because I know this is so controversial, and please do not misunderstand that I'm victim blaming. I have had a handful of narcissistic, like highly problematic people in my life forever, like since I was a kid. And that's how that starts, because it's like our radar for scanning like what is problematic behavior. If it's skewed to begin with, then, and we don't realize it, because we are our own baseline for normal. It's sort of like the saying that the last thing a fish notices is the water. If we don't realize, oh, this is a problem for people to yell and scream and drink too much, if we grew up in that, it might not register as a problem. So it's good to examine this now that we're thinking about things logically, right, and rationally, because this is how our brains work. Our brains are continually on autopilot. The vast majority of our decisions are made through our subconscious mind. We're so funny, right? People, like, we all think, oh, I'm reasonable and rational. Like, I just know what I'm doing. No, you don't. Like, we don't. None of us do. It's so much of it is coming from our subconscious, and we just don't even realize it until we generally have a relationship that's this problematic that it brings it to our attention of what on earth is going on. And that's the hidden gift in all of this is narcissists will appear in your life if there's something, and I know that sounds controversial, and I'm so sorry, and I do not mean it to re-victimize or to anger anybody, but it's our outer environment is always a reflection of our inner environment. And it's in a reflection of our self-orientation. So, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you had to come from like this deep dysfunctional family or what have you, but if your self-orientation is off and you're a forgiving and a kind and compassionate person, and you just don't realize that this is a thing, that these people are like out and about, en masse, then it's going to keep happening. And I speak from experience. Like I was like, I just don't understand. Like, I do not understand how this keeps happening to me. What am I missing? Like, this is not the first time I thought it was a coincidence in high school, like just weird, random fluke thing. Got tangled up with this guy, right? Just didn't think a whole lot about it. Had a few problematic friendships. That totally did not register because I thought, and this one friendship in particular, I even used to refer to it as an abusive relationship, and it was, but it never seriously dawned on me that could be a thing, because in my mind, it was only abusive if it was you're dating somebody. Just like I think a lot of people think, oh, it's only abusive if you're dating or if you're married. But if it's a family member or a sibling or a child or a friend, then it's not abusive. That's just your dynamic, which is not the case. Like, abusive behavior is abusive behavior no matter who has it. If it's worth breaking up or divorcing somebody over, if it's worth cutting a person out in one area of your life, it's worth cutting them out in other areas too. But there's that whole like social taboo of like, no, you don't do that with family. Family's forever, you know? And it's like, yeah, no, like, that's toxic thinking. Like, it's healthy to have boundaries and to be like, no, I'm not going to put up with this. I'm not going to be abused. I don't care who the hell you are. Like, I'm not going to be abused. So that was a very long explanation. I hope that made sense. Okay, Stella, Shadow, great. There's lots of great comments. Okay, Stella Shadow says, I really have a problem detecting problematic behavior. I can see it and not even know it's happening. I just got betrayed by 2 people recently, and hindsight is the cliche 2020. Yes. So I'm so glad you brought that up. And because that's a stage in all of this. So, because again, right, if we have gone through life being this way, seeing the world this way, of people are like me, like us, right? If we're going through life being like, well, I think people are like us. And if I treat them fairly and good, then they're going to be the same. And so it's that whole kind of reverse projection, right? So we're projecting all of who we are, our kindness, our compassion onto other people. It's probably not there because we're assigning them qualities that we don't know if they're there or not, right? So, and if we don't know the sign, like what problematic behavior looks like, and I think a better way to go about that is we do know how problematic behavior feels. So that's a good place to start. You know when something's off by how it feels, because it always starts off with confusion. And now let me kind of frame this a little bit here. Confusion is it's the first sign of cognitive dissonance, okay? It's that sign of, like that something's off. Something's off. It generally, okay, it's a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call of examining our behavior. So that confusion of, maybe this is a problem, it can be a sign of problematic people and abusive behavior, but it can also be, I'm sorry, these little bugs everywhere, go away. A sign of this problematic behavior within ourselves. So it can be this wake-up call. So it's not always a bad thing. With other people, though, by and large, I would say by and large it generally is. At a minimum, it's worth taking a step back and going forward eyes wide open, because we only feel confused when we lack clarity. And when we lack, the reason we lack clarity is because there's some pieces missing. So if there's pieces missing, then it's worth stepping back and examining what's missing instead of what our brain normally does, which is fill in those gaps with assumptions or with rationalizations. That's where we get into trouble. And again, everybody does this. So it's important to just go slow, especially when you're experiencing confusion, and to see that as the warning sign that it is. So when you're experiencing problematic behavior, and if you start, it's again starts off with that feeling of, that's weird. Is it them or is it me? Generally, it's them, okay? And because we experience confusion oftentimes if we want something to be something other than it is. So again, this is a concept in that book, Psychopath Free, that I absolutely love. He mentions the concept of what he calls a constant. And how I my interpretation of this, or my spin on it, because he talks about his cat being his constant. And I like that. It's how you feel around something. Like this is this person, thing, animal that's grounding for you, right? And of course, animals are fantastic for that. But I like to think of a constant as like a very healthy, well-adjusted person is my constant. I use my brother as my constant. So whenever I have any type of experience any type of confusing behavior with a guy, I think to myself, what would my brother say about this? Or how would my brother act? Or would my brother ever do anything like that? That'll give me the answer that I need. So if you find yourself trying to justify problematic behavior, if you find yourself with your kind of that gut feeling of saying, that something's off, then generally something's off. So, but it takes practice. It takes practice getting in tune with yourself. I mean, so many of us, we haven't been in tune with ourselves for a very long time, since we were probably little children. So there's a learning curve to all of this, and it takes time and it takes practice. And, I hate to say this, but it's true, is, you're probably going to continue finding yourself with some problematic people, hopefully not to the same degree as, what brought you here, but they're still going to be out there because you're learning this skill. So you're not going to have it all figured out right away. It's a trial and error, and it's examining and paying attention. Okay, so now you're like, okay, this hindsight's 2020, and then examining, okay, what did I miss here, and how could I do things differently? And the more in tune you get with your own gut instincts and how this behavior feels and how it goes down and just all of this, the more practice you get, the better at it you're going to become. So, I encourage people, because it's a learning curve and it does take practice, to try to practice it in a safe way. So I'm a big fan of meetup.com for that reason, where you're meeting people in a neutral place. You can leave whenever you want to just slowly practice paying attention to how you feel around different people and to be honest with yourself. That is, I think, what can be very difficult, because when we want a situation to work out, we experience cognitive dissonance. And when we experience that cognitive dissonance, that's when we start glossing over red flags. That's why we gloss over red flags. And we gloss over these red flags when we want a situation to be something other than what it is. And generally, if it's meeting some sort of emotional need, this is how people get tangled up in cults and in gangs and in dating scams and in online scams in general, and with abusive people, and in all kinds of like really problematic situations, is they tend, everything we do is meeting some sort of need, okay? Generally, it's a basic physical need, or it's a basic emotional need, or it's the need of stability, kind of to continue getting those physical and emotional needs met. So, for example, with like online dating scams, very common, people that are incredibly lonely get tangled up in online dating scams. And this is why, too, intelligence and knowledge has nothing to do with this. It has nothing to do with people getting tangled up or not getting tangled up in this. Because if we're driven to get that emotional need met, so if a person, again, has the need of, they're incredibly lonely, let's say they had a great childhood, right? Their self-orientation's always been really healthy. They've had a great job, they're incredibly intelligent, they've had a successful career in like financial planning, I don't know. And they were happily married for 30 years, and then their spouse dies. And now, for the first time in a long time, they're incredibly alone, and their world is just upside down. And then next thing you know, this actually happened to my mother's next door neighbor. Very intelligent woman, very successful, and got tangled up in an online dating scam and lost her whole life savings. How does that happen? It happens, she was incredibly, people like that get tangled up in this, or she was incredibly lonely. She saw, hindsight, right? This guy claimed to be overseas. He was telling her everything she wanted to hear. It always starts off slowly, right? Like, oh, there's some excuse that could be somewhat believable, possibly, maybe. Oh, they're in the hospital. They left their wallet at home. They need you to wire them, $500 to pay for these bills. Or they needed closing costs on this. They're, a multimillionaire, but yet they didn't bring the funds to close on this business. They need you to wire them $3,000. And everything is believable if we're wanting to rationalize what we're doing. Again, here's other examples. This is how the Holocaust happened. This is how otherwise sane, normal, decent people get tangled up in really problematic situations. So it's a slow descent of problematic behavior that we continue to justify, or flat out deny, because we can't face the truth, because the truth is incredibly painful. Let me back up. So the point of that is, and we all have vulnerabilities, okay? So narcissistic people, emotional manipulators, they don't target people, they target vulnerabilities. And they're out to get supply. Like, they want what they want, whatever that might be, as much as they want. And they feel justified and entitled to getting it. So they might target a person like online dating scams for money, okay? Or in real life for sex, or for fun, because they're predators, and it could just be fun. It makes them feel significant to bring a person to the highest of highs and then kick that chair out from underneath them and drop them to the lowest of lows. It makes them feel important and significant to be able to do that. So it's important, and this is part of knowing ourselves too, that we know what our vulnerabilities are. And we all have vulnerabilities. It's part of being human. There's nothing necessarily wrong with having vulnerabilities. It's basically, vulnerabilities is how in part of how we connect to other people, is through our vulnerabilities. So, but it's important that we know what they are, especially the more major ones. So if we're feeling really lonely, if we're feeling, scared, if we're feeling, fearful, to realize we're not going to be thinking straight until we can get those basic needs met. It's much easier to think straight when those needs are met. This is people say, like, don't make any major life decision after like a divorce or a death. And that's why, because you've got some really basic needs that are no longer being met, and you will spin into a scramble and not even realize it. And what's worse is when that happens, we tend to think we have total clarity. We're like, nope, I know what I'm doing. I am going to move. I'm going to quit my job and move across the country with this person that I met off the internet. And yes, I know I've only known them for a month, but you don't understand, we're soulmates, and this is totally what it is, and this is a really great idea. And then once either that relationship comes crashing down, like the reality sets in of like, oh my gosh, this is totally not what I thought it was. People have a lot of confusion and guilt and shame and embarrassment because they're like, how did this happen to me? And this is because this is a neurological thing. This is not logic and reason that's taken over. This is like the base part of your brain, like our brain's downshift to getting those basic needs met at any cost. So it's really helpful to make sure that your basic needs, basic emotional needs, basic physical needs are taken care of before we start dating. So food, clothing, shelter, money of some kind, something, right? Basic physical needs, basic emotional needs, that we have friends and hobbies and some sort of, support system. Because if that's not in place, then what happens is they start dating to fill that void, which is never a healthy way to go about it. And then that's what it's really kind of feeds that, others orientation. We start looking outside of ourselves for somebody else to meet those needs. And in part, why people have a hard time letting go of these relationships. Because it's like, when I was with this other person who, of course, was this like master manipulator and had morphed, who was like this social chameleon and had changed themselves into being our perfect partner, it's so hard to walk away from that fantasy, even though we know this is a mirage. This person that we're in love with does not exist. This is a mirage. I am never going to quench my thirst chasing this mirage. At a logical level, we know that. We know that. But at a deeper emotional level, because we're lonely, because we want companionship, because, we want to hang on to that fantasy, we want to hang on to that fantasy because we want those emotional needs need to get met. It's going to be much easier to walk away from a problematic situation like that if we can kind of like crowd it out, if we can start building up our like emotional reserves, right? So if we can start spending time with people, if we can start, doing things outside the house, and it doesn't take that much to kind of fill that bucket. So even, going to, I don't know what, like a meetup group, or going out to lunch with a friend, or going to, a church group or a spirituality group, or, Al-Anon or some type of group, having that human interaction really does go a long way at helping prevent us from being starved out in that area. Let's see, let me scroll up here. Yeah, okay, so Trisha was saying, I only caught part of this. Rebecca, it's not always caused by child abuse. Some narcissists are formed by parents who treat them like the golden child. So I'm guessing the question is, how are narcissists formed, right? And yes, and that's exactly what it is. So problematic personalities of any degree, of any kind, it's generally we are a product of our environment. Everybody. Okay, so and our environment's continually changing, but the environment that tends to have the most impact on the vast majority of people is our childhood, because that's when all of that programming was installed in us, right? So that's when we learned like right from wrong, what's normal, what's abnormal, kind of our baseline for what's acceptable, for our place in the world, for you know, our boundaries, for kind of behavior in general, from us, from other people, from our expectations, all of that. And of course, this is not something that a lot of us think about because we take it for granted, because we're just like, well, this is just normal. Like this, we oftentimes don't think that it may not register that we had a problematic childhood, because a lot of people, when they think of problematic childhoods, they tend to think of like extreme abuse of some kind or extreme neglect. And that's not always the case. Yes, that is for sure damaging, but really any type of, if a child is not emotionally like nurtured and empowered, that can have major negative consequences in that child's life. So like what what Postmodern's saying here, and a couple other people, Tricia, with the golden child. So spoiling a child is considered to some to be a form of abuse, because it's that child is being enabled. They're not being nurtured. They're not being empowered. They're actually being emotionally stunted because they're being cheated out of problem solving, out of being able to explore their world and their place in the world. They're being treated like a child, not age appropriately, right? So, you've got parents that are making their children's beds, and the children, are now 24 years old and they're doing their laundry, and the kids don't have, it's whatever the kid wants, the kid gets, and they never grow out of that emotional stage. So they're so used to getting everything that they want, that they have this attitude of entitlement, because that's all they've ever had. They were never told no. That attitude of entitlement was never squelched, whereas most people, when you're growing up, it's, kids have structure, they have rules, they have boundaries, they have expectations. And so a lot of times people that become very narcissistic just don't have that. And they're used to, and you can tell because as adults, they will like literally throw a freaking temper tantrum if they don't get their way. A lot of, I think only children are like that. And it's quite something to see a full-grown adult acting like a 5-year-old if they don't get their way. Highly problematic. It's problematic if, and that's the other thing too. So if a child grows up in a home where they don't develop those appropriate emotional connections to their primary caregivers, then the brain just links up things in a very strange way. So it's amazing how a lot of this stuff is so discounted. So here's an example. So they did this study with children in like Russian orphanages, right? Where there were, I don't even remember, like 10 babies for every one orphanage worker. And so these children were not able to, their basic needs were not able to be met on a regular, predictable basis. And so what they found was a lot of these children, because they were not held often enough, developed profound personality disorders later on in life. And they were tracing that back to these kids did not have that appropriate bonding at an early age. Same thing even here, here in the United States, where they were doing studies on children that were in like the intensive care unit, or that were prematurely born, and that they would put them in these incubators thinking they need to be in like this germ-free environment. The unintended consequence of that is that they weren't given that skin to skin contact with their mother, or with anybody really. They weren't given that human warmth and affection. And so the mortality rate of these children was really, really high. And then they realized that bonding, that all of these things was really critical to not only like our growth and development, but to actually to our survival. And so now in intensive care units and the neonatal units and things, they make that a huge priority to have that skin to skin contact, with ideally with the parents as much as possible, as much as, you know, of course, there's always kind of like that risk and reward balance there, but also with the other caregivers that are in there, and making it a point to like, we need to talk to this infant. We need to, make sure to spend time holding them and all of that, so that it doesn't negatively impact their health. This same kind of concept goes for like emotional bonding later on in life when the child starts getting older. So if they're not having those like a healthy emotional connections with the parent, if they're not feeling, important and loved and made a priority, and that their needs are going to continue to get met, then they don't attach. They tend to not attach properly, and then they tend to have some like really problematic behaviors one way or the other. There's a great book on this that goes into a lot more depth. It's the Complex PTSD, From Surviving to Thriving by Pete Walker. And he talks a lot about this and about how a child environment, impacts and shapes your personality, and then the different types of personalities that form from a childhood. So highly, highly recommend it. It's a good book. Good read. I think too, though, so all this talk with childhood, so much of what happens, so much of how we internalize what happens to us has to do with our perception of what happens to us. That's where things get, to me, they get really interesting, because it's not necessarily what happens to us. It's what we do with what happens to us. It's how we perceive what happens to us. So I think it can be helpful to, I think to let children know, for starters, at an early age, that, like, because I think kids are so often unintentionally like minimized and invalidated, right? So if they have a problem, or if they are upset, it's I think very common, very normal, very understandable that the parent might tell themselves, like, or tell the child, oh, you're complaining because, we didn't have time to read you a bedtime story. Like, oh, well, when I was a kid, we didn't even have bedtime stories. That kind of stuff. Like, that's very invalidating and minimizing, because to that child, they don't know any different. They only know their world. And so they learn, if they're bringing up these concerns of, mom or dad, I really want to spend time with you, and the parent's like, I'm too busy, or, this isn't, you should be thankful for the time you do get, or what have you, then the child tends to learn, like, okay, I'm just not going to say anything. Like, I'm just not going to complain, because I guess it's just me. I guess I'm just too sensitive, or too demanding, or not grateful. I'm not grateful for what feels like crumbs. And to me, it's all about opening up the conversation about this, and letting kids know there's a very solid chance that there's things that, as a parent, I did or didn't do that you have major issues with, that the parent might not even realize. That's where things get interesting, because it's just the child's perception of things and how much that can impact somebody. I give the example of my own life. So my brother is about 2 years younger than I am. And growing up, I was the kid. Everything school-wise came very easy to me. I learned to read at a young age. I was very content to just chill and read. Like I was just a pretty easygoing kid. And my brother was the exact opposite. He was dyslexic. He had ADD. He was incredibly hyperactive. Still is. And it just was a handful. And my parents, they had their own business and they were incredibly busy. So their spare time was minimal. And I really felt, and again, was just my child's mind perceiving this, really felt like, well, they have only limited time. My brother needs it more than I do. So because I love him, I want them, I'm just going to like step back and do my own thing, and I'm just going to read and take care of myself. And so I became one of those like mature kids, who was pretty self-sufficient at a really young age. And nobody thought anything bad about this. I didn't until fairly recently. But that kind of set the tone for me continuing to put myself last and to learn to be okay with getting crumbs. It wasn't my parents' intention to make me feel that way or for that situation to go down. It was my interpretation of things. And so I, of course, got like all of these messages that I wasn't good enough and that I needed to be okay with basically not having a lot of attention and, just on and on and on. And that's caused a huge negative ripple effect in my life. So oftentimes we think like, oh, it has to be this incredibly traumatic event that has this negative impact on a kid, and it doesn't. It can be something like that. So I think it's worth opening up that conversation, especially with children, to examine like to just talk and to actually listen to them, especially if our partner, if we were in an abusive relationship. So I think it's important to realize if we were in an abusive relationship, then it means our kids were too. And that they don't understand it, and that they've been manipulated and lied to, and that they're going to most likely have some self-esteem issues to work out, and they're going to have a skewed perception of what's acceptable behavior and all of that. So it's something that's important to open up that conversation, because it's not a matter, like it's not like a fringe thing. Like it's important to talk about that, because the odds of them developing some like really problematic behavior later on in life is really, really high. But knowledge is power, and I think a lot of times it's just bringing this stuff to our awareness, because like I was saying earlier, it's so much of this is just subconscious. We just don't even realize that it's a problem until we get tangled up in a situation that is so outrageously, undeniably problematic that we can't not see it. Yes, Salon says, I'm agreed, Dana. I was neglected the same time my mother was being abused. Yes, and so this is like this circle, gosh, these little bugs, this circle of narcissism and codependency that I was talking about. So at this level, right? So if you've got a codependent person that's at this like fever pitch in this relationship, they're being abused and they're trying to keep things together and they're denying things, and it's all about trying to keep this relationship together and not realizing that their kids are seeing them like being hit or being yelled at or name calling, and these kids are growing up in this abusive relationship too, and it's setting the pattern of how men should treat women or how women should treat men, or what families are like, or what's workable behavior. If this stuff isn't discussed with these kids, then that's their level for normal, more often than not. And it's kind of, I think, more the exception that a kid grows up in a really dysfunctional home like that and then decides, I don't want to have any part in that. More oftentimes we fall into those subconscious patterns of like what's comfortable, and what's comfortable tends to be what's normal. So, yes, I agree. Tricia says, being aware of our own subconscious programming, I think, is the key to breaking out from that and to healing. Yeah, it really is. It really is. I was talking to a friend of mine at work today about this, and she was saying, she's like, I feel like I get it. I get it. And that it was her relationship to herself that needed, like it needed improvement in how much that had impacted her life. Because it's so funny. So this friend of mine at work, like I just so enjoy our time together most of the time. She'll have an aha moment, and then I'll have an aha moment. We're very, very similar. Both of us were teachers. Now both of us are nurses, and we've both been in narcissistic relationships, and it was just, there's a lot of like commonalities there, and realizing none of our outer environment is a coincidence. That is a really big thing to realize. And it can be frustrating and angering and overwhelming to realize that, but it can also be very empowering because we have the ability to change it. But realizing that our self-orientation impacts everything. It impacts the kind of job we have. It impacts how much money we make a year. It impacts the kind of friends we have and who we date and what kind of clothes we wear and how we take care of our bodies and our houses and our cars, and it just, the ripple effect. And so, yeah, like examining that and working towards healing that. And so that's what we were talking about today at work on our little coffee break was, okay, so, basically examining like where we are, and then thinking about where we want to be, and kind of how to bridge that gap, like how to raise our standards, and how to examine what kind of messages were we fed, either intentionally or unintentionally. Because there's a lot of like really terrible, like codependent, dysfunctional messages that are fed to us through media and movies and, religion, and by friends, by family, by all kinds of people. And to really start to examine that, like what are the messages that I tell myself about a relationship or about money or about, my role in the world or what I'm capable of or what I'm not capable of, all of these things. It's really hard to, if not impossible, to achieve or to have successful results in any area of our life. We tend to achieve based on our level of self-orientation, based on our level of like self-esteem. So it's worth examining. Let's see. So let me North went south asking me about my bugs. Yeah, I have a plant in my living room that I think had aphids, and the plant, Yeah, the plant died. I sprayed it down with like clove oil and rubbing alcohol, and that normally does the trick, but I didn't realize until really late that it had such a bad case of aphids, and I feel terrible. So yes, these little bugs are still around. I don't want to kill them. I, kind of, they've got to die out. Like, so all of my other plants have been treated. Everything else is fine. It's just, there's a few stragglers. So I figure we'll just ride it out until their time here is up. Okay, that's a good question. Hearts of Gold asks, how can we become more aware of our subconscious programming? Are there specific questions to ask? That is a fantastic question. I think perhaps one of the most powerful questions that we can ask ourselves is, let me preface this before I say this, because my goodness, I feel like I'm gonna have so much hate mail this week. There are stages in healing and understanding to all of this, and we were victimized. So it is appropriate and normal and healthy to feel victimized after being a victim of a situation. So it is never, if we go through, being abused or exploited in any way, shape, or form, that's, no matter how codependent we are, it's still not okay. Like, it doesn't give up. It's, that their bad behavior is still on them, and what they did was still very, very wrong. It does not excuse their behavior at all. So part of healing is getting in touch with being angry and having it be directed to them. That's part of it, and that's healthy, because for a long time we were glossing over their bad behavior, right? We were blaming other people. We were not seeing things clearly because we were being manipulated, in addition to, just being naive, not realizing that people could exist, having potentially poor, weak boundaries. There's a lot of different like factors at play there. So being angry, being full of rage, totally appropriate. Kind of like just, there's such a wide range of emotions that are involved in moving forward and in actually healing from this, and it takes time, and there's no, it's just kind of, everybody moves forward at their own pace and at their own speed. So, okay, so with that said, when a person is further along in their healing, to get in touch, or maybe a better way to even approach this topic is, this type of situation aside, right? Like, let's just not even talk about this in terms of this situation, because I just don't, like, I don't want anybody to shut down and feel re-victimized, I guess, is my concern with this. But this is still a very good conversation that we can use in different areas of our life, okay? So to get more in tune with our subconscious, if we're going to follow the train of thought of, okay, our external environment is a reflection of our internal environment. Everything is all, and this sounds maybe like weird or very narcissistic to say, everything in our life experience is truly all about us. It really, really is. Everything is. And because our external environment is a reflection of us. Our emotions are a reflection of us. Our everything is a reflection of us. And so to ask ourselves, okay, like, why? Like, why did I choose to react that way? Why do I work at this job? Why do I have this person as a friend? Like just getting curious. So it's getting rid of judgment. It's not making this a good or a bad thing. It's just, this is what is. Like this is what is in my external environment. So why? Why did I manifest this in my environment? To go a level deeper, this is where it gets really interesting, is to ask ourselves. Now, again, this is only if you're like a willing participant in something in your environment, right? This obviously would not apply if you were like, sexually assaulted or, attacked or, not a willing participant in something. But if you were a willing participant in something, to then ask yourself, why would I do that to myself? Like, why was I in this relationship? Why would I have stayed at that job that was so rotten for so long? Why would I have stayed friends with that person who treated me so terribly for so long? And the more we can and again, this is really hard. And it's just, you've got to replace judgment with curiosity and just dig. Just dig. Why? Why did I choose that? And the deeper you dig, and here's what's interesting too, is the more you kind of like circle around that question, the more answers are going to come up. So initially it might be something like, well, I stayed in that job. And let me give you like kind of a shortened version of this. Everything we do, every action that we take in our life, it's to meet some sort of need. There's a purpose to every single thing that we do. It's really interesting when you start thinking about your life like that, where it's like, oh, like, addiction. Generally, if we're gaining or losing a lot of weight, if we're, gossiping, if we're doing any type of activity or behavior, there's a reason for it. There's a reason for it. But what's the big mystery oftentimes is why? Because that's where it's more the subconscious thing of like, it's so weird. Like, here's an example. So for me in my life, my weight fluctuates. This is probably one of the heaviest I've ever been. And my weight fluctuates radically, like by like 50 pounds. I don't do anything different. I don't even feel like that I even eat that different. Like it just happens. 50 pounds. Like that's a big difference. Huge shift in weight. And for me to not even like, it's not like it's not like I was like going to the gym or like eating salad or like doing anything to drop a bunch of weight. My weight just does that. And it has since I was like 12. So realizing, okay, just because I am not consciously aware of what's going on doesn't mean that there's not something at a deeper level that's going on that's driving that. And so it was interesting for me because when I started doing this website and the YouTube videos and everything, I began to put on weight. And of course, and again, this is the cognitive dissonance, right? This is what happens when our actions don't match our thoughts. You put on a pair of jeans and you're like, these jeans are really tight. That's really weird. Because I was in denial about it. I'm like, well, I don't think I'm not eating any different. So I had to rationalize what I was experiencing. So I had to change the thought. So instead of thinking, oh, I bet I'm gaining weight, my initial thought was, oh, I bet my jeans shrank in the dryer, right? And then it was, well, maybe I did gain a little bit of weight, but it's, it's around the holidays. Or, well, I guess I gained a little bit of weight over the weekend. Or I guess that, maybe I had sushi the night before, so that's full of sodium. So it's water weight. Like there's a million different ways we can rationalize things, right? it did not dawn on me for like, until it became a big enough problem, like this is how this goes for everybody in every situation, that it became a big enough problem that it was like, oh, okay, I can't ignore this anymore. Like something's really going on. Like I'm really gaining quite a bit of weight. I don't feel that I'm eating any differently. So what's going on? And then realizing, am I like emotionally eating? And then thinking about the different, because in my mind, I was like, well, it's only emotional eating if you sit down and eat like a whole bag of cookies or like a whole gallon of ice cream. I wasn't doing that. Just sort of like how the same people have that idea of it's not abuse unless you're being hit in the face and it's leaving bruises or breaking bones, right? Like we all have our line for like when it's really a problem, right? So I'm like, well, no, I'm not emotionally eating because I'm not like eating a whole pizza or doing anything like that. So what's going on? It didn't dawn on me that for a long time, like, oh, it can still be like emotional eating if I'm eating a lot of like high fat, high carb, kind of comfort foods, feel good foods. And it doesn't take that many extra calories a day, you know, to start really piling on the weight. And so once and then I began trying to pay attention to like, is there a direct like cause and effect to this? And it was just really interesting. Like when we start realizing these things, because then it was like, okay, if I start having anxiety about what have you, like start feeling overwhelmed with the comments, or I get negative comments, or which happens, and that's totally fine. I mean, people have their opinion. But I realized then right away, I'm like, I was craving chocolate, or I was craving some sort of like high carb food. And I had never noticed that connection before. So like, I guess the point of that is like paying attention to like cause and effect and how this, you know, plays out in your life across the board. You know, do you have a rough day at work and then you want to go shopping, you know, or do you find yourself watching a bunch of TV, or do you sleep? That's another big one for me. That's a sign that I realize, okay, something's off track. If I'm sleeping a lot, especially if I'm not waking up feeling rested, then that's a sign that things need to get more in balance for me. Postmodern says, Dana, you have a 16-year-old fan. That's funny. Yeah, you know, it's interesting. There is a gal, she's a moderator in my group. Her and her daughter started watching a lot of these live streams. And that, again, like we all have these like aha moments, right? It hadn't dawned on me until that point when she was saying her daughter, and I want to say her daughter's 12, was watching the live streams, that I realized, oh my gosh, some parents are watching these with their children. And that honestly, like that made my heart smile, because it's like, it's going to start these conversations. It's going to start these uncomfortable conversations, because this is tough stuff, right? But then realizing, oh my gosh, okay, I kind of want to watch what I say and to make these videos as like family friendly as possible, so people can have these conversations with their kids and, you know, kind of open that up. But it's I don't know, it's just kind of a side note. But yeah, that's cool though. Yeah, Mishmash says, it just dawned on me I was a very happy person but had a bad experience in 2009, and that is when the narcissist entered my life. It's true. If you're in a good place, they can affect you. Yeah. Yeah, they really are that sign that something's off. And that's kind of it's the gift in this. and it's such a hard lesson. I mean, it hits us at such an emotional and, financial and physical. It just devastates a person's life. But I think it's one of those things, like, it has to hurt that bad in order for it to come to our attention that there's something there. There's something that we need to address. So, yeah, Postmodern was saying yesterday she was really anxious and said F it to her diet, but today she's back on track. And, for me, like, so here's my new thing, is telling myself, or asking myself, if I really valued myself, how would I act? What would I eat? How would I dress? It's interesting to explore that, because when we do start realizing, okay, if I really, like, think about your child, right? we are oftentimes so much better to other people that we love. And then the great irony in that is because we are so used to being like, well, my needs and wants just don't matter. Like, it's okay if I have, a bowl of cereal for dinner or a candy bar for dinner. Like, that's okay. We would probably never, maybe cereal. Sometimes breakfast for dinner is fun. I love breakfast for dinner, actually. But we would most likely not do that on a consistent basis, right? With our children. We would not be like, oh yeah, that's fine. Like, you can just eat a candy bar for dinner. No, we would be like, you know what? We need to make sure there's some fruits and there's some vegetables and there's some balance in there. And we're concerned about them. How are they doing? And are they dressed appropriately? And who are their friends? And have they done their homework? And if we could take that same level of interest and care and protection and value and turn it inwards and be like, that concerned about how are we being treated, how are we feeding ourselves, how are we talking to ourselves. That's another good one. Because if we heard, imagine if you were to see your child or hear your child upset, right? And they're in their room and they're stomping around and they're telling themselves, how stupid, fat, and ugly they are. Like, over and over again, they're like, gosh, you really messed that up, and I can't believe you did that, and, oh, you're a failure, you're this, you're that. We would be devastated that our child would talk to themselves like that, right? We would just think, oh my goodness, oh no, like, I just think you're so wonderful. Like, you see, because you're generally, like, a parent who loves their child and who's attached to them, in a healthy way. You see the good in your child. I mean, you see the problematic stuff too, but you also see the good, and you're like, oh, kiddo, like, it's okay. You bombed this test, but you know what? You can do things different next time, and I have faith in you, and you're smart, and you're going to get it figured out, and we can study more, or we can see about getting some after school help or what have you. Like, you're going to troubleshoot that, and you're going to work towards a solution, and you know what I mean? Like, you're going to help to try to empower them. And it's so funny how we struggle doing that with ourselves. And it's like this free-for-all where we're like, oh, well, we're just going to, be jerks, like, to ourselves. Like, why? So it's important to pay attention to how we talk to ourselves. Really, really important. Dora says, Dana, I talked to you last week. My ex lives 2 doors down at his mom's house. I own my home. He lives there rent-free. He's not going to be moving anytime soon. I'm cracked, but I'm not broken. Okay, so this kind of goes back to, okay, what do you have control over in the situation? So you don't have control over him moving, really. So that kind of boils it down to you either have control over you moving or you trying to change the way that you perceive the situation. Like that's the only two things that you, as far as I can tell, that you have control over with this experience. So I don't blame you for if you were to decide to move. That would probably, frankly, that'd probably be something that I would consider doing. Yes, you own the house. Yes, it's inconvenient. Yes, you shouldn't have to do this. But it is what it is. And if it's going to continue to cause you tremendous amounts of stress and anguish and anxiety, by being, triggered every single time you come home, then to me that's not worth it. Like the price of your safety and sanity, that's a top priority in my book. So, and I don't think it means that you're running away from the situation. It just means that it's sort of like if a person, like here's an example. My mother's cousin, their son was killed on a motorcycle, and they still live in the exact same town. Okay, this happened like 50, maybe even 60 years ago. To this day, they will not drive down that street. It's just it's too much. So they go the long way. When we undergo some sort of traumatic event, people, it's okay. Like if it's too much of a if it's too much of a trigger for you, it's okay for you to do what you need to do in order to not be re-triggered. So again, you could consider, like I would start thinking about options. Okay, you could sell your house. That would be an option. You could rent out your house, and that might actually be a decent option. You could rent out your house for a year or two, and that way you're still getting rental income, you still own your house, and then you go rent a place somewhere else that you feel that you can come home and relax and not have to worry about seeing him or seeing his car or like running into them or any of that. That would probably be a quick and easy option. The other option would be, like I said, to change your perception of how you feel about being continually re-triggered. So if you're feeling like every time you come home and you're feeling intense amounts of pain, you're feeling angry, you're feeling full of like rage, all of that, to try to reframe how you're understanding those emotions. So to tell yourself, because all of our emotions are always, they're working towards our highest and greatest good, especially the unpleasant ones. So if we can realize that these unpleasant emotions aren't necessarily something to avoid, which is of course like our natural reaction to anything that causes us pain, that's a normal response. But if we can realize, okay, you're having these feelings of like stress and anxiety and depression and all of this because you're having a very normal reaction to a very abnormal situation. So it's your mind's way of reminding you, and it's trying to keep you safe and sane so it doesn't happen again, so that you don't date him or anybody like him again. So when you're starting to feel those uncomfortable emotions, to remind yourself, oh, I'm so relieved that I feel this awful. Like, because this is a reminder to never do that again. And to try to make it work for you instead of having all of this resistance to those feelings. It's just going to be kind of whatever you feel that you can do. But you're so fresh out of this, and it's hard to kind of have that emotional distance this early on. So don't get upset with yourself if you're not able to reframe things in that way. Because I really do kind of think that is a little further down the road when the pain is not so raw. But I don't know. Keep me posted. I'll be curious to know what you end up doing with that. Yes, Elise says, she says her problem is that during no contact, I don't always remember how painful it was. Sometimes I can't recall. Totally. And Kai Cools, go ahead and ask your question. I'm going to answer or throw in my 2 cents on this one while you're typing. So yes, and isn't that so interesting? So that's very common, and it's denial. And that denial is a defense mechanism, and it tends to come out when, if we were at one point getting some basic need met by whatever action we were taking. So if we were in that relationship, even if it was incredibly abusive, it's still meeting some of our needs on some sort of level, whether it's the need for companionship or the need for financial security or the need, kind of, all the different reasons people are in a relationship, the cultural, the expectations. It's convenient, like you have your routine. It's hard for anybody to leave any relationship or friendship because there's bonds there. So if whatever we were doing is meeting some sort of need and we leave, especially if that need hasn't been replaced, right? So if that relationship, if we were feeling lonely before we got into this relationship on a subconscious level because we were lonely, which of course primes us for love bombing. And so if we're meeting this person who it's this whirlwind romance, they feel like the perfect partner, they're like, we're really getting those needs met, right? Like that bucket was empty before, but my goodness, now it's overflowing. It's intoxicating when our needs are met to that level. It feels like we've won the relationship lottery, right? And so when things become problematic, it's understandable, and this is part of it, where it's like we justify and minimize and rationalize and deny everything that we're experiencing because we need to have our thoughts and our actions in alignment, right? So if our action is going to be to stay, then our thought has to match that, which is generally to be like, well, things could always be worse. It's not that bad. It's not his fault or her fault. It's, somebody else's fault. Maybe it's my fault. This is how we buy into all of this manipulation. So when that relationship ends, there's still that level of denial, especially if, and it's the weirdest thing, and I've experienced this too, where it's like that clinging to hope that this could potentially be different. And so if we think that we can get that need met, then it's like this fog just sets in, right? And it's that cognitive, it's that confusion that's created by that cognitive dissonance. And so our brain, because our brain is driven, it drives us to get our needs met all the time, not at a conscious level, oftentimes, right? So it's like our brain is needing to get that need met, and in order for it to like convince us that to take some sort of action, we oftentimes will quote unquote forget. And I've had this too. It's really, really wild when that happens. And then if we end up going back or reopening contact, because we're like, well, maybe we could still be friends. Maybe it's not that bad. We're trying to make it workable when really it needs to be deal breaker stuff. And so in order for us, again, to reopen contact with a dangerous and destructive person, we have to resolve that cognitive dissonance. We have to align the thoughts and the actions. So even if at a logical level, we're like, I am not going back to that person, it's easy to start slipping back into like nostalgia. And that nostalgia, it's basically our brain at a deeper level trying to convince us that we could make this work. Like we could still get this need met in this situation. And it's weird. It's weird when you're like, my brain is not like, whose side are you on? It's the weirdest thing. And so then now there's this huge internal conflict, right? I know on a logical level, I need to shut that door with this person and nail it shut. But on like an emotional level, things weren't that bad. I maybe want to open contact. We could still be friends. We're trying to just, it's that slippery slope into like rationalizing it. This is when I mentioned writing out that list of like, for when you miss him or her, that's what helps, because our brain we will quote unquote forget a lot of the stuff. And then we feel crazy because we're like, oh my gosh, how could I have forgotten that? Like, that's a big major thing. Like, that's weird that I glossed over that, or I just totally forgot it. But if we write it down and be honest with ourselves, because again, this is what's so hard, because our brain at a deeper level, it's wanting to get those needs met. And so and this is why like we're oftentimes lying to ourselves, or we go, and you probably see this, people go into therapy and then they're lying to their therapist, right? Because people tend to, they tend to wait until things are really, really bad in order to get into therapy. And then it's sort of like, then they might only tell like, you got to like pull it out of them, right? Like they're telling like partial pieces of the story, because in part they have forgotten a lot of it, because they want to make that relationship work, or they're minimizing it, or they're justifying it. And this happens with any type of dynamic, any type of like abusive, problematic dynamic that we're emotionally invested in. So whether it's with a parent, with our parents, or with our children, or with our significant others, or with church, or with kind of, you name it, it's the brain is a fascinating thing, the way it works. So it helps to put things down in black and white. And so when that denial, that fog, that fog of confusion or denial or manipulation, if they reopen contact with us, starts setting in again, that we can have something concrete to go back to and be like, okay, let's review this. And then that'll help to snap a person awake and be like, oh yeah, wait, what was I thinking? Like, no way am I falling for that again. Because when we don't have things in black and white, this is the whole dynamic of like, Lucy and Charlie Brown with the football, right? And this is what oftentimes will drive people to therapy, because they're like, what is my problem? I keep doing the same thing. Like, Lucy promises to hold the football. I run up to kick it. She pulls it away, laughs hysterically. I vow to never do that again. And then an hour later, here I am. She promises things will be different. She holds the football. I run to kick it. She pulls it away. I land flat on my back. Nothing changes. We keep going through this round and around and around this mountain. What is wrong with me? Why do I forget this? Why am I clinging to hope that this time it'll be different and that things will change? And it's why. That's why. It's because it's meeting some basic need of ours. So, okay, let me see. Okay, hold on. Let me see what's quick. Okay. Okay, Kai says, okay, so you know how I asked you about my mother enabling and passing information on to my narcissistic father. I sat her down and told her that she cannot pass on any information going into Christmas or my birthday. She agreed not to do anything like that this year, like she did last year. She promised me. So I'm fine about it now, but I still have doubts. Will this ever stop, or is my mother narcissistic too? Well, it sounds like it's appropriate for you to have doubts, because she has a pattern of not respecting your boundaries and of telling your dad stuff. So remember the whole thing, like, trust is earned. It's not something that's just given. And so it's going to take her having appropriate behavior that lines up, that our words and actions line up over a consistent period of time for you to trust her appropriately. So to just instantly trust her because she said she wouldn't when she has a history of doing the exact opposite would be a mistake. That's why you don't trust her, because it hasn't been earned yet. So you'll have a better idea of what you can and can't trust her with come Christmas time. Like, right, when you find out, okay, has she stayed true to her word? Has she kept your stuff private? But at the same time, kind of realizing, okay, if your mother has got this, she's enabling and she's, has very poor blurred boundaries with your father, then, I wouldn't necessarily be shocked if she continues to have blurred boundaries and poor behavior. And so then to kind of adjust accordingly. And so it's the whole, where is this? Oh, hold on. This was from the book club. I need to get these made up. Is this backwards? Is the writing backwards to you guys? Like on here? So okay, these little bugs. So these circles, I think this is such a great, this comes from Healing the Child Within by Charles Whitfield. And he illustrates this in the book. So this is where this drawing comes from. Oh my gosh, these little bugs. You guys, seriously, just don't be on here. This is kind of the evolution of boundaries, which I thought was fantastic. So he draws these out. So a stranger. Okay, so the circles represent like us and another person. So you have two people who don't know each other. So there's this appropriate level of distance between them. Distance not only physically, but also like emotionally, right? So what you would keep kind of this personal distance with a total stranger physically, and as well as like what you'd be opening up to emotionally. So you're not going to just, start telling your life story to a total stranger, although I'm totally guilty of that. but that's not healthy boundaries, right? Then the closer circles is like a casual acquaintance. And so now trust over time. So you meet this person, you start opening up slowly because trust is earned. It's not just given. And you're paying attention along the way of how they are reacting to this information. Are they safe? Can they be trusted? And so if they're like, yeah, okay, this person can be trusted, they're acting appropriately with the information that I'm giving them, then you move a step closer, right? So now they've become like a casual acquaintance. So now you're opening up a little bit more. You're telling them, a little bit more personal information about you, but you're still not telling them things that could actually negatively, impact you or anything. Like it's, still kind of surface level stuff. Close friends, there is an overlap there by about, what is that, like 10, 15%, maybe even 20%, where you're telling each other like personal things, but you're still not telling each other everything, right? But you're telling each other a lot. And then you have intimate relationships. So generally like, I think you could make the argument like parent-child dynamics and also significant other. So you're sharing a lot more stuff with each other. In theory, this is how a healthy, intimate relationship would be with somebody. This is what it would be like if it's enmeshed, where it's too much. People are too involved in each other's business, where there are not healthy boundaries, and there's like a good 80% overlap. Right? So there's no respect for personal space, for time, for sharing anything. It's way overlapped. And then this is the boundaries of dysfunctional families. So this large circle is generally like the narcissistic person in a dysfunctional family. Then you have the codependent person who, like 95% of them or so is intertwined with this narcissistic person, and then the child is kind of smack in the middle of that. So they're just consumed by both narcissism and intense amounts of codependency. So it's very unhealthy for them. So if you grew up like this, right, it's gonna be I would anticipate this. Like if this is the dynamic that your parents have with each other, this is probably still their dynamic. It would be great if your mother were to respect your boundaries, and maybe she will. Maybe this is going to be like a learning process for her too. But because she's already proven that their dynamic is very dysfunctional, that she's not respecting your boundaries at all, it's almost like we have to go back things up, way up, because we can't trust this person with information, because every time we do, they let us down. So now it goes back to whoop, square one. Okay, like we're up here because like I can't tell you anything, because you do, and you don't, your actions and words don't line up. So, and really it's almost worse than this, because again, like a total stranger is not actively working against you. They're just, you don't know them, so that appropriate level of trust hasn't been established. But with that kind of dynamic, like that this person's potentially actively working against you, even though they might not see it that way. They might think like, well, it's important that you guys get along, and he's your father, and so yeah, he's abusive, but he's still your father, so they're going to do what they think is best because of that, because their boundaries are so enmeshed and things are so blurred, and what's healthy and normal and appropriate is like way, way blurred. I hope that helps. So let's see. I had some questions to go through. Okay. People were emailing me throughout the week. So here's one from Paula. Paula says, I truly wish someone would have informed me about narcissistic abuse. Although I am older, educated, have lived in different countries, and have worked around others with diverse educational, socioeconomic, and cultural backgrounds, I would have thought I would have known better, and I certainly long before I was sucked in. It's frustrating and frankly scary that I was manipulated in this way. I guess I wasn't as globally aware as I thought. I wish someone would have dropped a hint to me, although I might not have believed it at first. Chances are things would have lined up, so that seed of information would have eventually validated what I was experiencing, and perhaps I would have gotten out sooner, or at least not have been sucked in for a second time. I will tell you that I've learned a lot through this experience about myself, and I am stronger for it, so there was a purpose, like every experience in life. Anyhow, my frustration at realizing that I was isolated by my ex, and that he was most likely keeping me and other suspected supply in their places at the same time, prompts me to suspect that we were all operating in an isolated, confused state, and like me, questioning what is or was being experienced, and all the while asking the question, is it just me? Having said that, I'd be curious of your perspective on whether or not one should warn any known suspected supply, if only to plant a seed that this individual is a narcissist and to pay attention. I might add that just approaching them briefly and with tact and compassion would be my preferred delivery. Is it wise to carefully warn the next or the current victim if presented with the opportunity, or would this action be an indirect violation of the no contact rule? Again, I only wish I would have known what this was. The signs were all there and very strong, yet I second-guessed and made excuses for every one of them. By the way, you are doing valuable work. We all need to get the awareness out there. People are being reduced to rubble by this kinds of abuse. We cannot let this evil energy win. Thank you. Okay, great question. So here's my 2 cents on this. Any action that we take in this life, we need to approach it from the standpoint of what do we need to do in order to stay safe and sane. So I think that's a good baseline for kind of making that decision. So if warning potential supply is going to put you in harm's way, then I would not do it. If you don't think it'll put you in harm's way, or for whatever reason, and you do want to move forward with it, I do think the approach of being, how did you put it? Oh, I can't, tact and compassion. If you were to approach it with tact and compassion, that would be the way to do it. Because keep in mind, what they're going through with this person is the idealized stage. And it's intoxicating if a person's never been in that before. So they're probably feeling like they've met their soulmate, and they're not going to most likely hear what you have to say. With that said, I personally, if it was not going to be putting me in harm's way, I would approach somebody and say, here's the deal. Like, I want you to know, I dated this person before. I'm probably going to come across like a bitter and jaded ex. I get that. You're probably not going to listen to me. I get that too. I don't think I would have listened to anybody had they tried to talk to me about this ahead of time. This person is really problematic. And I'm telling you this woman to woman, or for guys, like guy to guy, or human being to human being, right? I'm telling you this as a concerned person. This person has a lot of like deeply problematic stuff. When I started going through this is how I felt. I was feeling really confused. I was wondering if it was me or if it was him. I was doubting myself. I really think that he had been cheating the whole time. I would approach it in a way that you're leaving it up to her. So you're not being like, you're not coming across as a bitter and jaded ex. You're not coming across as that you're trying to convince her one way or the other. I would just say, this is what I experienced. This is the behavior that I experienced. This is the kind of stuff that he was doing. I realize you're probably going to go tell him everything that I'm telling you. And I also realize, because I know him well enough to know he's probably going to have a good answer for all of it. Because that's what he did with me. And I believed it for a very long time. I just feel like I need to at least give you a heads up. I wished I had had a heads up. But also, again, realizing they're probably most likely not going to believe you, because as we have all been there, it's very easy, especially, if she is feeling lonely or vulnerable or really wants to be in a relationship, and all of a sudden Prince Charming comes along, she's going to minimize and rationalize and justify what you're saying and how he's acting in order to continue to get that need met. And so she's going to buy into all of his manipulations and generally not see them for what they are until things get problematic. But it might help her to get out a lot sooner if you do say something. But again, this all is on the contingency of it's not putting you in harm's way. If you think that it could be dangerous or destructive or deadly towards you, I for sure would not do it. So let's see. Here's a question from Ginny. She says, are covert narcissists aware of what they are doing? All the lying, the manipulations, and all the deceit. Do they know they don't have a heart and soul? Yes, they are aware of what they are doing, and but they feel justified in what they're doing. So this is why you're seeing such like the lack of empathy, the lack of remorse, the justifications, the gaslighting, the projections, the all of that is they know but they know, but they don't want to know. So it's kind of like, with us, because it's the same thing. It's the same, they're experiencing cognitive dissonance too. Everybody experiences this when our thoughts and our actions don't line up. So if their thought is, that they are a good guy or a good gal, a good person. Their thought is, I'm a good person, but their action is to cheat on their spouse. They're going to have to justify that because, especially if they have a problem, if in their mind, like, a good spouse doesn't cheat on them, right? Like, they don't cheat on their wife. They've got to be okay with cheating on their wife. This is when people start rationalizing things. So that's when you're seeing that she threw herself at me. You didn't pay enough attention to me. You weren't sexy enough. You were never home. I was drunk. It's excuse after excuse after excuse after excuse because they've got to justify their behavior. Again, this goes back to, this is like the stereotypical phrase of an abusive person is the whole, look at what you made me do. It's that total lack of accountability because they have to feel, we all do, have to feel okay with the actions that we take. So for them to actually admit, to sincerely admit, because a master manipulator will admit to whatever they need to admit to in order to get what they want. Which then you're dealing with a totally different level of like pathology. But for like narcissists, I mean, all of it's damaging and destructive and, get out. But it's worth getting out of, I should say. So yes, they do know what they're doing and they feel justified in doing it. That's what makes them so dangerous and unpredictable. And of course, they work up in their mind that everybody else is a bad guy and they had to do what they had to do. So, okay, here's one from Rebecca. Rebecca says, I have a question in which I hope you can help with. I have an 18-year-old daughter. She has been abusive to me most of her life, and it got really, really bad from the ages of 13 to 16. She has been receiving different help over the last 6 years. There have been improvements over the last few years which have allowed me to heal. What I'm struggling with is when my ex left, I could close the door on him and use that as a way to move forward. I've got my flashbacks down to only a few a week, and my thoughts are a lot calmer, but I think the reason I just can't move forward is I don't want to disown my child, but I don't want to put up with this anymore. As I said, she has improved, and I think that gives me hope, but I also don't want to be lying to myself either. Can you help me see a way out of this? So there's a handful of things that I want to say with this, okay? And we were talking about this a little bit earlier, but it's important if we have been in an abusive relationship to realize that our children have been too. And so she has a lot of hurt and a lot of anger and a lot of confusion and has also been through the manipulation and the lies and feeling unsafe and scared. And her growing up in that environment is incredibly traumatic for a child. And when people are angry, especially kids, now granted she's 18, but at any age, really, when people are angry, there's a saying that anger is the bodyguard of hurt. And I think this is especially true when you're dealing with kids, especially if this started around when 13 or so. This was in this dynamic. Kids tend to lash out at the parent that they feel the safest with. Unfortunately, that tends to be the parent that was, the one that got out of the abusive relationship, the one that's been trying to make things work and who's been trying to, give and give and give and give. And it's so for you, right? It's sort of like, oh my gosh, I went through this abusive marriage and now my child's abusing me. And all I've ever wanted to do was just have a happy home and just be loving and be loved. I did not sign up for this. So but this is what kids do if they have an abusive parent or a hurtful parent of any degree, is they lash out at the parent that's still around and that they think the parent that's not going to up and leave them. So I would encourage you to have some honest conversations with her about what went on, and to really try to be empathetic and see, and to not be defensive, which can be very hard because, again, you guys were all in this relationship, but she has a very different perspective of things, and she's got her own pain and her own anger, and she might have a lot of her own issues and dynamics at work here because it's from her point of view. So here's an example from my own life with this, okay? So my mother she was remarried to a guy who was a narcissist, and he didn't like us, and we would come over very rarely. We were adults when they got married, but whenever my brother or I would go over there, he would leave the room, he would go upstairs. He made it very clear that he just didn't want anything to do with us at all. We really did not have much of a relationship with my mother for about 7 years. And that caused both of us a tremendous amount of pain. And we were very angry at her for choosing him over us. And for like being okay with not really having much of a relationship with us for 7 years. She finally left him, and then it was sort of just kind of like all of a sudden she wanted to be re-involved in our lives, and like, okay, well, everything's fine now. I'm away from him, so we can start spending all this time together. And my brother and I both were like really hurt, and really, because there was no acknowledgement of that. And I don't think I've brought that up with her. And it was sort of like, how do we react to this? Because in a way, it's like, yeah, we know what she went through, but we and I don't I know she's been through enough, so I feel like, okay, I don't want to bring up any more. But at the same time, there's a lot of unresolved stuff there, where it's like, you weren't around for 7 years, and now you just want to come back in our lives and act like everything's fine, and it's not okay. So that's kind of what I'm saying. Like from a child's perspective, she perceived the relationship very differently, and her role in it and what she went through was very different. So, and those are going to be some hard conversations to have, but I think they're going to be worth having. So to try to just hear her out, and to not argue with her reality about things, and realize that a lot of that anger, it probably from a lot of what she went through. So in the meantime, okay, so if you still want a relationship with her, and therapy has been helping her move through this anger and with your relationship and all that, you can still set loving boundaries with her. It helps to do this in a way that you're setting both her and you and your relationship up to win. So if okay, certain topics are sensitive, for now, you just, if it's, you don't like her boyfriend, you don't, her car is a mess, kind of she smokes, whatever it might be, just steer clear about that. Focus on having fun together. Focus on conversation that's bonding, and to maybe spend less time together. So if you're okay, we can't be under the same roof for a week, but we do great when it's lunch or what have you, right? So kind of knowing your limits, anticipating her behavior, anticipating your behavior in response to her behavior. And I think to try to just approach her with love and just say, honey, I love you so much. And I'm just so sorry that, I wish our dynamic was different. I really want to work towards improving things. And then I think once she can start feeling heard, then things can open up. But if therapy has been working, I would say to keep going with it. Yeah. So I'm so sorry that you're going through this, and that she's going through this, and hopefully both of you guys can work through this and make this experience of what you went through to hopefully like strengthen and deepen your relationship over time. Let's see, Marie says, Dana, where is the chart? Which chart? Oh, the boundaries chart. Okay, let's see. The boundaries chart. Okay, and again, I'm not sure if this wording is backwards here. If you can see that. I will turn this into like a PDF document. How about that? And let's see. I will give me like a day or two to get that done, and then I will link to it in the description area of this video. I'll put it on my website, but I'll link to it on my website in like by Friday. How about that? By Friday. We'll do that. So, because I think that's really, I really liked how he drew all that out. So let's see here. A lot of questions. See if we can find some shorter questions here. Okay, here's one. Here's just an interesting one from Want to Live Narc Free. She says, I am a daughter of a narcissistic father. She says, I recently found out that this is what his disorder is after years of emotional abuse, controlling behavior, and manipulation. As a result, I think that I do on some level suffer from complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Added to this, I have married a very sweet man, but someone who is a scapegoat to a controlling, narcissistic mother. She's a widow and comes to stay with us for prolonged periods of time, after which I sink into severe anxiety and depression based on the emotional abuse she dishes out, both to me and my husband. More me as I work from home, and she is there all the time and only has contact with my husband in the evening or on the weekends. She bamboozles through my already not very solid boundaries, and now that I am aware, I consciously try very hard to maintain these, but the experience is extremely draining and soul-sucking. She has recently left after a visit of 6 months. How can me and my husband go gray rock or no contact with someone like her, especially since our culture, we are Asian, and our family structures would frown down upon abandoning a widowed mother? Wow. Okay, well, for starters, all cultures frown upon abandoning a widowed mother. Okay, so that's not just an Asian thing. However, it's more than that, right? It's people not understanding an abusive dynamic. And that also, unfortunately, is like pervasive through pretty much every single culture, because people have in their mind of what's abusive and who can be abusive and what dynamics are abusive. So most people tend to think it's only abuse if you're being punched, right, in the face, and it's leaving bruises or breaking bones, and it's by your husband. Outside of that, it's really not seen as abuse by a lot of people, which is unfortunate. So a lot of people minimize any type of dynamic that does not fit that, right? So there's a couple things that you could potentially do with that. Okay, so you could talk to your husband. This might be plan A, okay? Talk to your husband about we need to be a team. Like we need to be a united front on this. I don't want to be a bad guy. I know you don't want to be a bad guy. I can't do this. Like 6 months, I can't this woman is awful and I can't do it. And you know I can't do it and it's sucking the life out of me and it's making me sick and it's awful and it's impacting our marriage and all of that. So being very clear, I cannot have this in my life. We need to think of something different. This is negatively impacting our marriage. So with that said, let's get a plan and let's be united in that. So that way I'm not the bad guy and you're not the bad guy, that we speak with one voice about this. Okay, once you guys can get on that page together, then you can figure out a plan. What does this plan look like? Does this mean that maybe she comes for and stays for a significantly less period of time? And then it's hard to draw boundaries with the person who just steamrolls over them. I get that. I'm a huge fan of like open, honest, sincere communication. If you feel like you can't have that with her, which I get it, she's probably not going to change, right? Then I would think of, okay, how can you draw some boundaries? So maybe it's you just get real busy. Like, you know what? We would love to have you stay for 6 months. That just sounds like so much fun. I really look forward to these long visits where, you emotionally abuse me, but I have to go out of town. So we've made plans. We've had this family vacation that we've set up. We can't do 6 months, but maybe again, like kind of thinking, well, what could you do? Could you do 2 months? Right? Or saying to her, you know what, my job is really unpredictable. I'm traveling a lot, or he's traveling a lot, and we just really don't know his schedule, and kind of putting it off. Or saying, you know what, instead of you coming to see us because his work schedule is just so unpredictable, and we'll come see you. And so we'll come visit you, and then you guys figure out how long you can stay with her. So like a week or 2. So that would be an option, right? And then just blaming it on work, blaming it on something outside of your control. Another option would be to see about her potentially not staying, if she comes to visit, and this might, again, these are just options. I'm not saying that, like, you guys will have to decide, right? But okay, if she comes to visit, then maybe could she stay in a hotel? Could could you stay in a hotel? Could you say, you know what, I'm going to go visit family, or I'm going to be out of town, and then you get out of the house. So getting creative about how could you make this work. I understand the whole cultural component, but at the end of the day, because my family is Sicilian, and it's very much the same, family first, and it all of that. So at the end of the day, though, it's your life and it's your marriage, and you guys need to do what you need to do, because I guarantee you're not going to be 90 years old thinking, I am so glad we listened to all of these people who told us that we need to continue having his mother stay with us for 6 months out of the year. I am so glad that was really great advice. Like, no, like you're not ever going to think that. So if they tell you, if they try to lay a guilt trip on you, like, oh, well, but she's his mom, and she's a widow and this, and just say, you know what? It sounds like maybe she'd be a good fit for your home. Maybe she could stay with you for 6 months out of the year, since, you guys are so caring and compassionate and concerning. And we really would appreciate that. that will shut them up really fast. So do what you guys need to do in order to save your marriage, for starters, because that's your top priority. And, as well as like saving yourself and your sanity and all of this. So your relationship with your husband outweighs his relationship with his mother. That's how that goes when people get married. Like, you leave your parents and you form an alliance with your spouse. So I hope that helps. Okay, let's scroll down here. Yeah, Carolina says, my kids were in the abusive relationship with me. It's a hard truth to swallow. Yeah, it is. And I just, we get tunnel vision when we're in stuff, and we just kind of lose sight of the full impact of it. Again, like, I remember my mom saying, this was not even that long ago, like, because after she divorced my father, and then it was 7, 8, 9 years later, she married my stepfather. And, my father was very controlling, and my stepfather was just snarky. I don't even know the half of it, I'm sure. But very condescending and just gaslighting and, very narcissistic. And after she divorced my father, she was in therapy for like a long time, and really has awesome boundaries, and has just done a really, really great job with turning things around for herself. And so she was going to like a lot of like CODA meetings and Al-Anon and stuff like that. And I remember like asking her recently, like, why, like, she knew about this. Like, you knew about like narcissism and codependency and that, like, boundaries and all of this. Like, how come we never had this conversation? And she felt terrible, but she was like, she thought it was her issue. It just did not even dawn on her that I grew up in that. So it wasn't just her stuff, it was now my stuff too. And even if people don't grow up in a den of dysfunction, like most people do. So this is a critical conversation to have with kids about boundaries and, like, our orientation and, self-orientation. Are we more others oriented or more self-oriented, and like what's an appropriate level, and that there are people in the world that are master manipulators and will tell us everything we want to hear, but then we've got to look at their actions, and on that being caring and compassionate, and all of these things can be problematic to an extent. And having these conversations, it's right up there with like sex education. It's right up there with understanding money, and how to balance a checking account, and how to do kind of like the basics, right, of life. And it, again, like, but like none of this stuff is really taught. None of it, like sex education or money or interpersonal relationships or understanding our emotions. That's another big one. Conversation that I think is really worth having with kids, especially for the gal that was talking about her daughter who's 18, and the daughter is really angry, to realize, okay, when we're having an emotion that's disproportionate to what's currently going on, that's generally a sign that we're going through an emotional trigger, which means that there's underlying issues there that we need to work through. That's deep stuff. Like, that's life-changing stuff. I had no idea about that. Had I known that, like, back when I was 18, oh my gosh. Because when the way that we feel feels so valid. Like, I am full of rage. Like, and it is, it is valid because that is the way we feel. But at the same time, it's also worth examining, is this proportionate to what's actually going on? Like, if you happen to see, I don't know, like a German Shepherd, and your ex had a German Shepherd and you now hate German Shepherds, like, that's not normal. So to figure out, okay, why do I avoid German Shepherds, is worth doing some digging. Totally valid. It's however you feel is how you feel, right? But it's worth examining deeper. And to kind of just explaining that to kids, and opening up those conversations and sharing examples, I think is really powerful, because it's one thing to talk about it in kind of generalities, but it's another thing to explain, okay, like, this is the silent treatment, and this is how a person goes about it, and this is this is actually a book I'm working on right now, which hopefully will be to the point where it can go to an editor in like a week. But so this book that I'm working on right now, it compares and contrasts often confused concepts, like the difference between like a like problematic behavior and like abusive behavior, or a normal relationship and an abusive relationship, or appropriate guilt and inappropriate guilt. Because people, myself included, like tend to get tangled up in these things. And if we get tangled up in any one of these, then it can really derail us for a long time. Appropriate emotions, or like, what would be the opposite of that? Like disproportionate emotions, I guess. And just kind of teasing out both of those concepts and comparing and contrasting and opening up those conversations. So, by the way, Martine, it's really good to see you here. Phil ask Dana, can I ask a question? Yeah, go for it. Phil said, it made me laugh when Dana said about offering the mom to go stay with the other person. Yeah, well, really, like, I tell you, isn't it? It's so easy for us to be like, oh, this is what you really should do. And it's like, well, if you don't have to live with the consequences, then you don't get to vote. So if you want her to come stay with you, then by all means. I don't want to be the only one having all the fun here. Like, she can come stay with you. Yeah, it's totally okay. KLB says, Dana, can I ask a question? Yeah, go for it. All of this stuff really boils down to knowing, like knowing yourself, and like checking in with yourself on a regular basis throughout the day, and paying attention to how you feel. And that's really how you know when you're relating to other people in a way that's keeping you safe and sane, or if something just needs some more adjusting to kind of get back in alignment. So if if things are a little out of line, then taking some additional action. And a lot of this stuff with boundaries, this is an ongoing thing, because our boundaries are going to grow and change as we grow and change. So what might be our boundary today might be very different in 6 months or a year from now. Oh my gosh, I look back on the things that I put up with thinking that that was healthy boundaries 10 years ago, 2 years ago. No way. Like I would totally out of the question now. So the healthier we get, the healthier our boundaries in turn get, which is exciting. So you just keep moving in the direction, just keep paying attention to the results that you're getting, pay attention to how you feel. And because if you're feeling agitated, frustrated, resentful, angry, depressed, anxious, those kinds of things, generally those are a really great sign that your boundaries need some work. So that somebody's taking too much or that you're giving too much. Or putting up with things that your inner self knows this is not healthy for me to put up with. Okay, let me see if I got the... Oh, this chat is not... Okay, KLB says, Dana, do you have any advice for establishing boundaries with an entitled golden child? I guess it depends on, is that entitled child a child or are they an adult? But I guess even with that said, it would be the same way that you would just stand firm. So, like, informing them, like this is what's going to happen, right? So like, for example, with a child, it would be like, hey, you know what? Bedtime is 8:30. You need to have your body in the shower by like 7:30. Homework needs to be done by, I don't know, 6. Homework needs to be done by 6:30. Shower at 7:30. We're gonna do, bedtime story at 8. Lights out at 8:30 or whatever your routine is, right? So like, this is the routine. This is what we do. We don't like this. These are my expectations. And so like, as an adult with people, it can be like here, like for example, so my thing is I turn my phone off. I can't, frankly, anymore. I'm so in love with having my phone off. I had never turned my phone on. But it started off because I used to have my phone on all the time. And I had people calling me all the time. If they were bored, if they were drunk, if they needed to talk, like around the clock. And I just thought that's what a good friend did. And, but it was really negatively impacting me. So then I realized I don't like this. Like, this isn't working for me. It's making me lose sleep. I'm grumpy the next day. I don't get to wind down at night. And so then it was the realization of, I'm going to turn my phone off at like 9 o'clock. And then I'm going to read for a little bit. And then I'm going to go to bed. And that was my boundary. So sure, you can call after 9 o'clock, but my phone's going to be off and I'm not going to get it until the next morning. So my friends learned very quickly, like, yes, this is my boundary. Like, I have to do this in order to keep my sanity and to be respectful of myself. And so at first, some people were upset by that, but then people get over it, like, oh, okay. At first it's a big deal, but then it's not a big deal. So, the same kind of things. That is, again, kind of the gift in this. When you have a person that continually pushes your boundaries, the gift is it teaches you to have stronger boundaries. So there's always kind of the good, everything in our life experience is there for our personal growth. It really, really is. And if we can see it from that way, which does take time, especially after we have been victimized, right? That it doesn't mean that we're okay with what happened. It doesn't mean that we want to repeat it. It doesn't mean anything other than we can still squeeze a lot out of it and make this situation work towards our highest and greatest good. So, okay, and then Phil had asked, Phil, where's your question? How do you get out of the tangle? Let's see, he says, is there a band-aid we can use to gain our control, to face our fear? Oh, I misread that at first. I said to face our fear of short people, but you didn't say that, which is a good thing because I'm short, so I don't want you to be afraid of me. Is there a band-aid we can use to gain our control, to face our fear for short periods of time? Further explanation can be provided if you need it. I think to face fear is generally bigger. It's sort of like the whole thing, right? Like what we only have to fear is fear itself. Like our fear of something is often much greater than the reality of it. So I am always a big fan, and it's so much easier said than done, and I get it, and I by no stretch have this perfected, but it really does help if you can embrace it. So embracing that emotion, because that fear is there. All of our emotions are designed to bring us a message, to bring something to our awareness. So if you're having fear about something, instead of trying to run from it, even though it's a very intense emotion, right? To try to just embrace it and be like, okay, fear, I'm here. What message do you have for me? What are you trying to protect me from? Because that's what fear is. That's the goal, right? So, and to pay attention. Like, what is that about? What is that fear about? Is it about, being alone? Is it about other people, judging you or judging your situation? Is it about, is it about finances? Is it about, and then getting as clear as you can possibly get. And you'll know, like once you kind of hit on that, it's like hitting a nerve. You're like, oh, that's it. Like bingo, that's what it is. To kind of drill a little bit deeper. So then once you realize, so for example, if somebody is feeling really fearful and they're terrified to leave, I think there's a lot of women in particular, especially, so like my grandmother was married to a narcissist. She was terrified in part to leave because this was back in the 60s, I think. Women back then didn't have credit. You couldn't buy a car or a house without being married. And, she had no money. She had no real job experience. She'd been a stay-at-home mom and had, she rented rooms out in their house to make ends meet and all kinds of stuff. Well, her fear was money. So what helped her was to develop a plan of, okay, if this is the fear that I have around money, then what plan can I develop? So, that could be, okay, I could go live with a family member for a little bit, or I could, try to get a job. I could try to get a second job. I could, and just start listing out options. I guess that's the point of what I'm saying is once you can identify what the fear is, then start listing out options. So if the fear is potentially being alone, okay, then addressing those specifically. I could join meetup groups. I could make more of an effort to reach out to other people in my life, and so on and so on and so on. Okay. Okay, Phil says, in my case, I used to fight against a narcissist in the courtroom and face a judge that terrifies me. I am not healed and I need to gain some control back. Okay, so that is difficult, and that is scary, because judges in general, or people in authority, are scary, but especially in a courtroom, right? The judge is generally sitting up higher. They're in the black robe. There is this very intimidating presence. They are deciding major things about your life. Valid reasons to be intimidated and fearful about. So it can be helpful to try, I guess, as much as possible to realize the judge is a person too, okay? And to see them as a person. Like, they are a person. And this whole situation is going to play out how it's going to play out. All you can do is all you can do. You do your best, and then you let go. That's all you can do. All of that worry and that rumination and that anxiety and all of that, it feels productive, doesn't it? But it's not. It's not. So all we can do, knowing what you have control over, right, which is the attorney that you have, the evidence that you have, how you prepare for court, these kinds of things, to do the best you can, and then let go and realize that you will get through this. Either way this pans out, you will get through this. So I don't know if you're in my support group or not. There's lots of different support groups out there. My support group there's one on Facebook, although people maybe in the chat can talk a little bit more about that. I don't know if you're on Facebook. The one on my website is thriveafterabuse.com/forum, FORUM. And that's a support group on my website. It can be very helpful if you want to keep like your name not associated with being in a support group. Because the group on Facebook, it's a closed group, which means that other people on Facebook can see that you are a member of the group, but they can't see what you're posting unless they join the group. And we don't let friends like join the group. So if it shows that you are friends with a member, we don't let that person in, for other people, for your protection, that kind of stuff. But getting support during all of this is huge, really, really huge. And lots of men go through stuff like this. That's another added component. Okay, Irene, thank you. She says, I keep trying to get on your website, but it won't let me register. I have a guy who's working on that, hopefully tomorrow. So, yes, that is. And it's weird because some people have issues and other people don't. I just don't understand what the glitch is. It's frustrating. Phil says, so in my case, I fear losing my child, so the only option is to fight and not let the fear control. Yes. Yes. There's a great book, actually, that might be really helpful for your situation. It's called Divorce Poison. You can read my notes on the book. It's on my website, thriveafterabuse.com. under the tab for book club. And if you go, I forget which month, it wasn't that long ago that we read that. I have my notes for that book, and it's very thorough notes. That book is, I think, fantastic as far as people that are fighting for custody and you're dealing with a narcissistic or highly manipulative partner, which is kind of one and the same. And the whole parental alienation and how to go about that. There's lots of different strategies in the book with how to maintain a relationship with your child during all of this, and also how to kind of effectively try to play this game with a highly manipulative person. So highly, highly, highly recommend it. And that might give you some strategies, because a lot of it, when you're dealing with a narcissistic person, it's a game. And I think if we can all remember that, it's a game. It's all about them getting and keeping power and control. A lot of them are incredibly, insecure and like just, if you can kind of figure out, ask yourself, assess the situation. Like, what are her weak points? What is she sensitive about? A lot of narcissists are very sensitive to criticism, very sensitive about everything. If you can figure out, like, what are her weak points? How does she see herself? If she really sees herself as she's this really great mother, and if you're starting to feel like, what, because this is the added challenge for men, is it's very hard for them. Unfortunately, the law is instantly on the woman's side, especially when it comes to a lot of, child custody kind of things. So it doesn't take a lot for a few false charges, and a guy loses complete custody of his child. So knowing this and talking to your attorney and being like, okay, what is our strategy? What is our approach? And then asking yourself, what are you going for? Are you going for visitation? Are you going for partial custody? And then asking yourself, where is she coming from? What does she want? And kind of, what is this about? So if for her, you feel like she's really driven to look like a good mother in public, or like she's really driven to, I don't know, to try to get revenge on you for something, then just to feed into that, and to kind of, and this, it's game playing, but this is, when you have a narcissist in your life, this is what it is. It's playing a game. So to be like, okay, if she really wants to look like this really great mother, to continue to feed that and be like, okay, to give, you could even, and these are strategies in this book, this divorce poison book, like talking about mentioning her strong sides to her, and to try to kind of like let her save face, basically, because when a narcissist gets attacked or feels like they are being attacked, that's when they really lash out and they just become vengeful and hateful. So I will be very curious to know what you have to say after you read that book, or you read my notes on that book. Let's see. Through the Looking Glass says, Dana, can I ask for some advice on how to manage no contact with a parent when you know they are dying? I guess then my question would be, is it managing no contact, or is it managing the feelings you have about going no contact and staying no contact? And this is such a personal thing, and it's totally up to you, and whatever you feel that you need to do in order to stay safe and sane, also to not have any potential regret. So if you want to continue staying no contact, which is fine, it's totally fine to do that, then if you're struggling with feelings of like, like guilt or remorse or any of these things, to kind of explore that. And if you do potentially feel pulled to reopen contact, you can always this is all up to you, right? This is all up to you. So it's about, okay, if you were to reopen contact, in what ways can you do that to where you don't reopen up yourself to abusive behavior? You could write a letter. you know, it's totally your call. But I think, and it's so hard. It's so hard. Like it's never easy when you're dealing with an abusive person that you care about, or that you at some point had cared about, right? Especially if it's a parent, because there's so much that's intertwined with all of that. It's not an easy situation by any stretch. Irene asks, where did it go? What are the good techniques for overcoming the trauma bonds? Is EMDR a good method? EMDR can be, from what I hear, is a great method for overcoming lots of different types of trauma. Same with the EFT, like the tapping therapy. So those would be some good things to work on. I think too, filling the void that has been potentially left in your life by this person, staying busy can really help. Trying to build a life that you love can help to decrease those trauma bonds. They do tend to pass with time, and the more you can pour yourself into kind of like crowding them out, like building a life that you love and filling that void, then that void will disappear in a lot sooner of an amount of time. So, okay, guys. I think we're going to call it a night. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here and for the chat and the really great questions and just all of it. I hope this was helpful. And remember, too, this is my 2 cents. So, and I know we touched on a lot of really intense and potentially very painful and very controversial topics tonight. And, just please know, I come from a good place. I really, really do. And if I say anything, my intention is never to hurt anybody. It really isn't. And so if I said anything where you felt re-victimized or angered or let down or disappointed or hurt, that I'm truly very, very sorry. That is definitely not my intention. So please just know that. Okay. Okay. With that said, thank you guys so much. If you have a question for the live stream, I do my best to get through as many of them as I possibly can. You can email me, deardana@thriveafterabuse.com, and I will do my best to answer them on an upcoming episode of the live stream. So with that said, I will see you guys next Wednesday, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you guys take care. So lots of love to you. You are not alone. You are not crazy. And you really, really can move forward and heal from this, okay? So take care. I'll see you next week. Okay, bye.